promotion of the Opportunity Scholarship Act, which, as all of you in this room know, was not enacted for a variety of political reasons. And, excuse me, I'm hearing from the Governor Kane. Okay, good, thanks. Our keynote speaker is 10 minutes away. Who would have thought there'd be traffic in New Jersey? So the New Jersey School Choice and Education Reform Alliance was, our principal focus was the passage of the Opportunity Scholarship Act. Although that's off the front burner for now, we did want to keep the alliance alive, and we wanted to focus on other areas of school and education reform. There are some, including Dr. Alita Eck, who believe that discussion of accountability for public schools and school choice are antithetical. They're two polar opposites. Those of us who have organized this conference respectfully disagree, and that's why we thought it was important to explore Common Core, its strengths and its weaknesses, and its potential for the future. We have a terrific lineup of speakers, and I will not describe their credentials to you individually. They're all spelled out in your program. The one group that is not represented this morning, regrettably, is the New Jersey Education Association. Representatives from the NJA were repeatedly invited and repeatedly declined. So we'll have to hear their views in some other forum. After the keynote and after each of the panel discussions, there will be an opportunity for questions and answers. There are 3 ways you can ask your questions. We'll have a live mic available on the floor, a wireless mic. You can, especially those of you who are watching live stream, you can text your questions to area code 609-460-0044, or for those who remember how to use a pen and paper, there are index cards on the tables for you to pass your questions up to me. And I'll try to pass both the text messages and the handheld messages, the handwritten messages to the panelists. Susan Taylor. Susan will be walking around picking up your handwritten messages if that's the way that you want to communicate. And I would ask that those of you who have questions pose them as a question, not as a speech. That you identify your organization if you are a member of one or representing one, and that you keep the questions short. We have 2 options right now, I guess, to trust the traffic or to go to panel 1. Yes? Okay, good. Joanne LaPerla Morales is the president of Middlesex County College, which has graciously agreed to host us for this event. For some of us, regrettably, this is our first visit to this very fine campus, and I'm delighted to introduce her to you now.
Congressman. It's my pleasure to welcome you here today to our beautiful campus. Middlesex County College has 13,000 students in our credit programs and another 11,000 in non-credit programs, and so I'm pleased that you all got a parking space this morning. We don't take the traffic as our problem. Anyway, we're really pleased to host this conference today because the topic of the Common Core is something that's very important for us at community colleges. We're very interested in following what is happening with the Common Core and looking at its implementation, because we are optimistic that the Common Core will provide parents and teachers and school districts and colleges and employers in New Jersey the assurance that students who are graduating from our New Jersey high schools will have experienced a curriculum that is aligned not only with our college expectations, but with the expectations of employers in New Jersey for the workforce of the future. We're honored to have a distinguished panel today, and of course we're especially honored to have Governor Kane arriving any minute. And we hope that today there will be lively discussion and good discourse. We know that there's a lot to be said on both sides of the issue. So gentlemen, are you going to do the panel or wait for the governor? Okay. See, after my long speech, you get to take a break and wait for the governor. Okay. Great.
Well, I know that before I'm done, the former governor will be here because I was told to speak until he gets here. Well, thank you all. I appreciate the opportunity to make a few remarks on standards in education. And I'm going to talk from a business and then also a personal perspective on some of my thoughts with respect to the topic at hand today. But let me start off with the observation that I work for a very large public company in New Jersey, Prudential, that lives and dies with talent and culture. We don't invent things, we don't manufacture things, we don't formulate drugs. The business we do depends on the qualities of our people and their ability to do things in the marketplace better than anybody else can do. And so, as you might imagine, we spend a lot of time working on talent management and thinking about how we're going to have the essential tools as a company to compete and win and succeed. And our talent management process starts with the idea of standards. We have pretty well thought out views of the kind of qualities that we need in people who can be successful at Prudential. And by qualities, by the way, I'm not just talking about technical skills that actuaries have or finance people have or investment people have. I'm talking broadly about qualities like the ability to collaborate, and leadership skills, and the ability to manage and develop talent on your own within the company. And that process at Prudential that's defined by the idea of standards has elevated our company to the level where we produce extraordinary performance and where we're known in the marketplace for talent and culture as a good place to work. And a lot of that reputation comes back to the idea that we make the effort, we think it through, and we put people in an environment in which the standards are well understood. Every once in a while, I've moved up to a pretty high level in the company, and every once in a while, somebody will get up enough nerve to ask to see me to talk about their career. And so someone comes in who may be a young adult, or someone comes in who may be a mid-career executive at Prudential, and we talk about the company and we talk about what's going on, but inevitably the conversation will come to the point where I'll be asked, what does it take to succeed in Prudential? What should I be doing? How should I develop myself? What should I think about in order to be able to take the next step? Now, I feel obligated to answer that question. I can't just say, boy, I don't know, you're kind of on your own. Go out there and see what happens. I have to say something. I have to have an idea about what's expected. And I have to have an idea to develop this individual about how that person can be equipped to take the next step, to have the choices to advance in Prudential. Sometimes it's very specific. I want to be chief financial officer someday. Sometimes it's just, I really like it here. I see a lot of things that are interesting. And I want to be equipped to move through this organization in different and interesting and exciting places. Maybe I want to go to Japan someday. But again, I'm obligated to answer that question. I have to say, here's what I think it takes to succeed in this company. And if you do this, you will have those choices. You'll have those opportunities. and you'll be able to be successful in Prudential. Now, the transition to education. First of all, that young adult or that mid-career executive sitting in my office talking to me has some pretty well-formed ideas about where they want to go and what they want to do. They have expectations for their career. They have needs and expectations from me as a person they're talking to in the company. And they have needs and expectations from the company as it relates to their own development. Well, kids don't work that way. They don't have all those well-developed expectations and ideas. They're not necessarily thinking about what's next, and they're not necessarily thinking even about what's coming up that morning. But the idea of equipping people for what's next and having choices is a very, very, very important theme that translates from my work environment to my personal life. I've got a 13-year-old son, and he's absolutely remarkable. And we sit sometimes and talk about how he maps out his life, how he thinks about what's possible. And it's exciting, and it's stimulating, and it's interesting. And he'll talk about a career as a lawyer, or he'll talk about a career in politics. Sometimes he winds up as UN ambassador for the United States. Oh, by the way, on those two, I get it. I've got some work to do with this kid. But sometimes he also talks about being a research scientist or a teacher. And I don't come out of there thinking, my God, I've got to get this kid into Harvard Law School. But I do come out of there thinking, I've got to make sure that he has the tools, that he's equipped for whatever's next, that he has the choices when he gets there, whether it's now finishing 8th grade and looking at high school. There'll come a time when it'll be finishing high school and looking at college. There'll come a time when it's finishing college and maybe looking at graduate school. And my job is to make sure that he has choices. I haven't been vice chairman of Prudential my entire life. And I had days in my life when I had no choices. And I know the frustration. And I know how hard it is. And I know that all you want sometimes is to be able to make the next decision, to decide which school to go to, what to major in, who to work for, what field of study to pursue. And so my obligation to him isn't, as I said, to track him right to Harvard Law School. My obligation now is to make sure that he has the choices that he needs when he finishes 8th grade to go on to high school. And so that means I've got to be able to put him in an environment where the standards, back to my points about Prudential, where the standards are understood, where it's not just an abstract idea that if you tick this box or if you pass that milestone, all of a sudden you've got the choices. You won't. You'll have the choices if you turn that abstract idea of choice into real substance around preparation and around being ready for the workforce, or being ready for college, or being ready for the Peace Corps, or being ready for whatever it is that's next. And so when I think about the standards initiatives, I hope you can tell from the way I'm expressing this story that I've got a lot of personal equity in this idea that what we want to do is make sure that our kids have the choice, that they can move on to whatever's next, that they're equipped and they're prepared, and they're ready. And they're ready in terms of the real substantive aspects of what it takes for whatever's next. My own son, by the way, is writing his autobiography, projected 60 years into the future, and looking back and going through every single thing that's going to happen to him between now and then, including where he's going to live and how much he's going to pay in property taxes, where his kids are going to go to school, and what golf club he's going to belong to. But again, I'm not going to put him on that path. What I'm going to put him on is a path of preparation and a path of understanding exactly when he's ready to make the choice, that he has the ability to make that choice. So the Common Core has grown up around this idea that it makes sense to be able to answer the question, what do you expect? What should I know? And again, the appetite isn't the kids out there targeting the specific next step. The appetite is our obligation to prepare them to take that next step wherever they choose to go. And as we've developed the Common Core, and I'm involved in Achieve, and Prudential has been involved in Achieve from its beginning, as we've developed the Common Core, and as the standards have emerged, we get a lot tangled up in execution and implementation and how it's going to happen. I'm sort of thinking that's your problem. But what I'm thinking as a policy matter is that our obligation to answer that question can be fulfilled. As I said, in the prudential setting, my obligation to answer the question of what am I going to do to prepare myself to succeed in prudential is parallel to my interpretation of my son's challenge. What am I going to do to have the option to pursue any of these different routes that I might go down? So grounded in the idea that the answer to that question is not abstract, it's concrete, it's real. We can look out the window, we can see what we are expected to know, and we can see how we are expected to perform in order to be able to make that next choice. And that's what, in my sort of personal and actually intangible but meaningful sense of what I think we're obligated to do, that's what I think the Standards Initiative is all about. And as I talk about it within Prudential, as we talk about it in the context of Achieve, we keep thinking, I really wish we could rise above the arguments and the issues and the tangled up situation that we can get into around execution and focus on the idea that this is our obligation. We are committed to making sure that that's not an abstract answer to that question, that it's a real answer to that question of what's out there and what do I have to do to be able to be successful in that environment. Now everybody's moving around over there, but I can't tell if they're moving around over there like Governor Kane is here or not. Are we getting close? All right.
He's in sight. He's in the building.
All right, well, I timed that well to finish up as Governor Kane was arriving. Now, a lot of times when people are introducing other people, they start off by saying, I'm about to introduce the man who needs no introduction. Most of the time, that's not true, but sometimes that actually is true. And in the case of Governor Tom Kane, I think that probably is true. I have notes, and I'll be happy over coffee later on to share any aspects of the history of Governor Tom Kane with you that you're interested in, including his education and the boards that he's on and other things that he's done. But let me introduce him by saying, first of all, he was a distinctive governor who did a fabulous job. He's been a very important champion of the education cause within the state and nationally, and an important leader for all of us with respect to improving quality of life, quality of education, and focusing on that, be ready for whatever's next type of question. And with that brief introduction, I'll turn it over to our keynote speaker, Governor Tom Kane. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and my apologies. There's a lot of rush hour traffic out there this morning. Never happened when I was governor. But it's bad. And, anyway, I'm glad to be here. I saw a little more of your campus this morning than I expected to. But it's good to be here. I'm a historian by training. And I used to teach history. I used to teach classical history. And I remember a story about Aristotle. Aristotle, remember, is the pupil of Plato, and teacher of Alexander the Great. And he was one time asked, what's the difference between an uneducated person and an educated person? He thought for a minute and he said, it's the difference between being alive and being dead. Now, I don't know if we all quite agree with that definition, but in this complicated, incredibly complex world that we are now living in and bringing children into, the difference between somebody who's uneducated and educated is one of income, one of class, one of living conditions, one of all sorts of differentiations. which are very hard, frankly, to put up with and still sustain the kind of democracy we all believe in. Education is more important today than it's certainly ever been in my lifetime, perhaps ever before in history. Because we've never had the kind of inventions, the kind of complexities, the kind of knowledge that are required to live a decent life. And so if you're not educated, and it's not that being educated is what it used to mean. When I was governor, we worked very, very hard to try and get people through high school. That was the goal. If you could get a high school diploma, and not enough people were getting it, so we worked and did this and that to try and get more people through high school. Very few of those people went off to college. But if that high school diploma would get you into a job, it would get you into a decent life, and that was the goal. We all know that's not true anymore. That wasn't it. It's not the goal anymore. It simply is not the goal anymore. It can't be. Because we know with a simple high school education, a student cannot get the kind of jobs which are going to enable them to advance and have a decent life. So the goal has changed. Now it's college ready. And that's far different. Far different. And yet, that has got to be the goal. And because not only nationally in our own country, but internationally, we've got to compete with so many people. We've got to compete well. Remember the story about the fellow who was on the trail hiking? His pack on, a friend with him, hiking along, and it came around this mountain curve. And right on the other side, they saw a grizzly bear. And he's blocking the trail, he's standing right there. And one of them gets down and he starts tying on his running shoes. His friend says, "No point doing that. You can't outrun a grizzly bear." The fellow said, and says, "I don't have to outrun a grizzly bear, I just have to outrun you." And we're facing that grizzly bear now in this country. And we better put on our running shoes. We better get ready to do that. We've got to decide in this country what children want to know and what they should be able to do, and then help them to get there. And you've seen all the surveys. There's no point giving you dark stuff today. I mean, we know when I was looking at the other day, 30 industrialized nations. We're still 25th in math preparedness, 24th in problem solving, 21st in science proficiency, 15th in reading. I say if we cure all of that, we can increase domestic consumption by 30%, change our whole style of living. We know all these things now. The question is whether we know what to do and whether we're willing to do it. And that brings us to the topic, of course, that we're all here to talk about today. This discussion of the Common Core leads from a long history of work. We stand on the shoulders of a lot of people here who have worked on these problems now for 30, 40 years. And you've seen it happen. I don't know if the start was actually present, maybe before that, but remember, those of you who are old enough to remember the nation of Britain, how shocking that was. First time we really recognized our schools were not world class anymore. They always had been. This is the best in the world. All of a sudden we realized they weren't anymore. And that report, a national report, suddenly said, by the Reagan administration, by the way, suddenly said, you know, if a foreign power had ever done this to us, to our productivity, to our future, we would have declared an act of war. This was so devastating to us and to our economy. And from then on, the nation has been focused on trying to see how we could get back our lead, how we could make sure our kids were as good as anybody's, how we could get back on top. And it's been stop and go. And the road's been bumpy to try to get there. But we've tried to get there every step of the way. As I say, first talking about getting through high school, and finally talking about other things. But it's been difficult. I remember in 1988, after doing a lot of education reforms here in New Jersey and elsewhere, we were proud. In 80s, we were proud. We got mentioned twice by two presidents. State of the Nation reports saying New Jersey was leading the way and trying to improve schools. That made us very proud of New Jersey. But it wasn't enough. I remember standing on the steps of Thomas Jefferson's University, surrounded by 50 other governors, reading the President of the United States. We were all there to one purpose, and that is to declare the states, not the federal government, the states, were going to solve this problem. The states were going to determine what our kids had to know, and we were going to develop the standards. And we do it independently of the federal government. The federal government would help where they could. And that was really the start into the whole movement toward where we are today. The Common Core. Now, in New Jersey, for decades we've had a recognition of the kind of things we had to do. Federally, we started with No Child Left Behind. And that was the first time we were expected, frankly, to test our students, to measure where they were. Well, the state's a little nervous about that. You test, and you find out the test doesn't do very well, and then your parents and voters and everybody else find out your kid's getting low scores, and that's not very good. So they tested, but a lot of the states lowered the standards. So the tests looked good, but they looked good according to standards, which were not going to really be world class and not really going to benefit our kids in the long run. So that's what we did under the No Child Left Behind. We set goals for student learning in English languages, mathematics, at the end of each grade. These were measured by assessments by each state. But New Jersey wasn't unique here. A 2010 review of each state's standards by the Thomas B. Fordham Institute rated the state's old standards low. The LA standards received a grade of C, as they inadequately addressed topics like grammar and research, while failing to define the quality and complexity of reading that is appropriate for these students. The math standards also received a C, for failing to require that students learn standard methods for solving basic equations and allowing students to use calculators to solve problems far too early. Another Fordham report, the Proficiency Illusion, found that New Jersey set the passing score on state tests far below the level expected of students in most states. Now, this is especially striking when considering that even many of the toughest states set that bar below the level expected by real international standards and peers. So it's not surprising that too many of our students were really unprepared for what life had to throw at them. A 2010 report from the Education Trust found that 26.5, it's over a quarter of New Jerseyans, taking the armed services aptitude battery test failed. And that's the gateway to military service. A quarter of our students failed that test. A 2011 study from the Alliance for Excellent Education found that a one-year cost of $71 million for remediation. Essentially, in other words, that's for a college president or a college like this, you're going to spend a lot of your money remediating and trying to teach students you've admitted are freshmen. You've got to spend a lot of money teaching them and getting them up to college standards. because they didn't get there properly in the schools. You talk to any college president, and he will tell you, I'll tell you, having been a college president, you have to spend a lot of money in remediation. And it's money that you should be spending, you know, advancing your students' skills and learning and higher education, not going back to see what wasn't done in the schools. Now, there's a lot of background to say, here we are, we got some Common Core standards. Now, let's understand what these standards are and where they came from. These were initiated, first of all, it's nice in this country to hear this word, by a bipartisan group of governors, Republicans and Democrats. And they partnered with top state education officials across the country because they all recognized the same thing, that we're just not adequately anymore preparing our students for what they're going to need in this life. So they were developed by the states. They were adopted by over 45 states, simply because people didn't want any more kids who were adequately prepared for college, or for that matter, even more important, for a career. Now, while New Jersey standards were rated C in both English and math, these standards are rated B+ and A. So they're much better than our old standards for independent ratings. And the standards have a wide degree of support, including teachers, National Parent Teaching Association, business leaders of small and large companies, college and university leaders, military leadership, and faith leadership, among others. And they recognize a couple of things. We can simply not go on the way we're going on in this country and be the kind of country we want to be. It's just that simple. Do we want this inequality of income to go on and to spread? And can we have that and maintain our democracy? Well, we know that the difference in income between somebody who has that college degree in his or her hand and somebody who doesn't is $35,000 to $40,000 sometimes a year. Huge over a lifetime. And the more that education gap increases, the more that economic inequality gap increases. But if you could set standards and make everybody stretch to get there, things change. Now, is it going to be politically difficult? Yes. When first people take these tests, you're going to find people who are getting, students who are getting 80 to 85 on tests are going to be getting 40. But that's okay if they're the right standards. And that's where we got to get to. That shows how far we have to go. And we also have to prepare people for it. You're going to tell people, parents, teachers, everybody, that we expect this initial test to be low. Because they're harder tests. But you've got to meet these standards. Otherwise, we're not going to make it. Now, a lot of concerns have been raised about these Common Core standards. People say, well, we don't want federally mandated standards. Well, it was governors, it was state legislatures, it was state boards of education that determined whether or not to join. They'll decide now whether to have the standards or not. It's up to them, it's not up to the federal government. And they'll decide how we're going to prepare for those standards. We'll decide individually here in the state, as other states will too. Now, I recognize a race to the top. They tried to put in with standards to prepare for the Common Core. But the federal government only got involved in that after the standards were already well under preparation and well done. States are free to make changes to the standards, or frankly, to adopt different ones going forward. Some people say, well, it's going to create a national curriculum. We don't want that. Well, that's simply not true. The only required text for students, this is required, to reflect the national standards. What the national standards are. Only required things. The Declaration of Independence, the preamble of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and Lincoln's Second Amendment. I don't know who objects to that, those documents. Those are the only things that would be required at the moment under the Common Core. They simply outline the Common Core, what students should know upon completion of each grade. The standards don't suggest any methods that teachers should use to educate their students and which materials they should utilize while doing so. Local principals, teachers, school boards, and each state will continue to make these decisions on their own. In fact, many teachers feel it gives them more flexibility in developing lesson plans to meet the individual needs of their students. So, look, a lot of this backlash is based on facts that are just simply not true. To say we're not going to go ahead with the Common Core is to say that we are satisfied with the status quo. We cannot be satisfied with the status quo. We have never at our best in this country other than satisfied with the status quo, and we certainly can't be satisfied with the status quo when you're dealing with the education of our children. We have an ongoing crisis here. It's an ongoing crisis that determines whether our children, whether our grandchildren are going to have the kind of lives we have. Whether or not for the first time in this country we're going to say our kids are going to live lives that are worse than ours. Because look, we can't have a small elite rising in this country. All boats have got to have the ability to rise. Everybody's got to feel they have a chance in this country for that American dream. Because when you don't, then this country suffers. Education is the answer. Standards are the answer if you get kids up to those standards so they're competing again in this world with any, and our kids are bright enough to compete with anybody in the world. As long as they learn what they have to learn in the world in which they have to live. I'll give you one more story. This is a New Jersey story. I like New Jersey stories. A number of years ago, there was a large boat making its way up the coast. And it was foggy, as it often is off the New Jersey coast, and the captain looked and he saw this light of an ongoing ship coming at him through the fog. So he blinked signal lights, 10 degrees starboard. The light kept on coming. And then came the signal back, U-turn, 10 degrees port. Nothing happened. They keep pushing each other. The captain finally got on the microphone and yelled through the fog. Look, I'm a captain. This is a battleship. I order you move 10 degrees starboard. Back through the fog. Now getting very, very close came this blinking light. Well, I'm a private, sir, but I'm on a lighthouse. You better move. Hey, we're heading for the waters. Clear water is straight ahead. I've worked in this field a long, long time, and I think we're on the right path. You know, it's not, as Churchill said, you know, after winning one battle in North Africa, this is not the end. It's not the beginning of the end. It's not even the end. Maybe it is the end of the beginning. Because I think we have the path ahead. I think we see clear water ahead, but it's dependent on our going ahead and adopting decent, good, clear standards that will enable our students to achieve what other students are doing in the world, and even better. Thank you.
governor's agreed to answer a couple of questions. I got some through the texting function. For some reason, the texts are coming over in fragments, so I hope that I'm getting the proper sense of what they say. But one, you had mentioned socioeconomic issues, Governor, and how can you achieve the common cause standards without first addressing the socioeconomic issues that underlie challenges in education?
Look, I'm going to be as blunt as I can. We all recognize the problems of poverty in this country. We don't talk about them enough. I've been a poor the last number of years. I've heard from governors, the President of the United States don't mention the poor when they do the State of the States or the State of the Nations. We all recognize the problems of poverty and how we have to, as a people in conscience, address them. But we cannot use that as an excuse. We can't say, because the problems of poverty are taking a long time to address. We tried a lot of things 30 years ago. Started with aid programs, reform, welfare, a whole bunch of stuff. Look, poverty is still there. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't go ahead with education. Does it make it more difficult than the others? Of course it does. Of course it does. But the exciting thing in education are there are schools now, both public and charter, that have taken areas where kids are very, very poor and made unquestioned progress. I can take you, and you can take me to a school in Newark that takes kids from the poorest demographic area of the state, or one of them, and sends 90% of them under higher education. What I'm saying is not that we don't have to address the problems of poverty. Of course we do. But we can't say people are poor, therefore we can't change schools. We can't say people are poor, therefore kids can't meet standards. They can, they have, and they will. But we just got to put the standards up there so they have a chance.
Any, we can have one question from the floor because we're running late. Carolyn?
Governor, you said that state legislatures approved this, and I hear that being said by boards of education, superintendents of school. That is not true in New Jersey. Can you comment further?
No, I think this was adopted in other ways in New Jersey by the governors. I don't know. I think it would be unusual to have a politically elected state legislature in New Jersey debating what you should do with curriculum and standards. I'm not sure that would be the right thing to do. We could do it, but I'm not sure it would improve the standards as much as having educators, teachers, school boards, boards of education, State Department of Education, those people more involved. I think they're probably standing against our legislature, but they may be even more knowledgeable than our state legislators on educational matters. So I don't, we could bring it up in the legislature. I'm not sure it would be at this point a healthy debate. The information out there on Common Core now is so distorted. Maybe it's the name. Maybe they shouldn't have called it Common Core. Maybe that gives it all sorts of impressions that it's something that it's not. Certainly our legislators should be educated. And I think they should be very aware. And I just, one final thing is, I'm a legislator. I was a legislator for 10 years. They don't pay enough attention to education. Most of them, not all of them, some of them do. They don't know enough about education. They don't spend enough time in the schools. They don't recognize that there's nothing more important that they do. The most important thing a legislator can do, I believe, is understand education and work to improve it in the state. They just don't spend, they're into other things.
Thank you very much. I'd like to invite the first panel to come up on the stage. It will be moderated by Michael Petrilli, who is the president of the Fordham Institute, which you mentioned in the governor's speech.
Good morning. Great to see everybody, and wow, it is impressive to see Governor Kane come here late, running from the traffic. He gets up here, gives this amazing speech, and even when there's a sound of what sounded like machine gun fire, he didn't blink. That was incredible. I think at our table, we all were under the table there in a few minutes. We'll see if this panel is quite as exciting. Michael Petrilli from the Thomas B. Fordham Institute. We are an education policy think tank in Washington. We also do on-the-ground work in the great state of Ohio. We are focused and have been for many, many years on two big issues. One is on expanding parental choice in education, and the other is on standards-based reform. And it's always been our view that these two big reforms go well together. And I think we're going to talk about that and many other issues on this panel today. The charge that we were given from the organizers was to talk primarily about implementation of the Common Core here in New Jersey. To really get into some of the nuts and bolts about how it's going on the ground, and I'm very excited that we've got some educators here with us to talk to us about that. But we also know that there's many people here in the audience who have strong views on the Common Core, pro or con, and we do want to give at least some chance to have a bit of a debate on the standards themselves. I know that you heard Governor Kane give a very strong argument in favor of the standards. And a lot of people here are not as in favor of those standards, including on our panel. So what we're going to do is start with just a little mini debate. Okay, we have asked two of our panelists, Karen Nussel and Bob Bowden, to be prepared to give the strongest arguments for and against the standards as they see it. I would agree with Governor Kane that there's a lot of misinformation out there. I would argue, and I am a proponent of the standards, that there are some legitimate arguments, concerns about the standards, and some that are less legitimate. But we really want to have a brief discussion here about the meat of the issue. What are the major concerns, and then what are the major benefits of these standards? And then we're going to pivot and really spend most of our time in this panel talking about how it's going on the ground in New Jersey schools. Okay, so let me very briefly introduce our panel. I'll go from your left to right. So first, Bob Bowden, the director of the Cartel and founder of Choice Media. Yes, thank you, Bob. Does great work, particularly in the school choice world. And Bob and I have gotten to debate each other a couple of times. Usually, Bob, I have to say, it's in forums where, most of the audience is on Bob's side. So you might be a little outmatched here in terms of numbers, Bob, but it's only fair. Kind of getting you back from all of this. It's a switch, exactly. It's only fair. Then Karen Nussel, the executive director of the Collaborative for Student Success, which is an organization that's working to promote these high-quality standards. Then we've got Vincent De Lucia, a New Jersey School Boards Association educator in residence. My paisante, yes. Very good. And then finally, Patricia Wright, Executive Director of the New Jersey Principals and Supervisors Association. Okay. So let's start. We'll start with you, Bob. Go ahead and tell us, we're going to try to keep this brief, in just a few minutes, what you see as some of the major concerns that you've got about the Common Core standards.
Thank you, Mike, and thanks, Susan.
All right. Yes. Thanks, Mike, and thanks to the group for inviting me here. I'm delighted to see such an unbiased moderator as Mike Petrilli, one of the most prominent defenders of Common Core around the country.
I will make sure this is fair and balanced.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, Governor Kane said that to oppose Common Core is to say we're satisfied with the status quo. That's not where I'm coming from. I am neither satisfied with the status quo nor supporting Common Core. I feel that it's a one-size-fits-all footprint across the country, when what's really needed in education is more competition and diversity and innovation, not more consolidation, bureaucracy, and monopoly. So that's where I'm coming from philosophically. Let's talk about the standards. Really quickly, as Mike has asked, the math standards in particular have been criticized as being weak. They basically go to Algebra 2 in high school, the most advanced math with maybe a little bit of trigonometry. When I was in high school, I took calculus. A lot of kids take pre-calculus in high school. A lot of kids take trigonometry in high school. And yet, if you look at James Milgram, the Stanford mathematician who was involved early on math standards development, later did not sign on to what was produced, he says these math standards aren't good. He says, by international comparison, that by the 8th grade, Common Core math is 2 years behind our leading competitors internationally. He says that if Algebra 2 is the highest math you take in high school, and then you want to go to college to be an engineer or a scientist or a mathematician in STEM, in other words, as a college major, you have a 2% chance of getting that degree in the STEM field once you go to college. So there's a lot of questions about the standards themselves. Let's also talk about the fact that states are pulling out, not just from the standards, but even more so from the assessments. So PARCC, which in New Jersey, there's 2 assessments meaning the tests that are given every year to kids. 2 main state consortia develop these tests. The SBAC Smarter Balanced is one, and PARCC is the New Jersey side of the equation that we're on. Starting with over 20 states originally, now it's down to 13, I believe. States have been pulling out of the PARCC assessments. They've been also pulling out of the Common Core standards themselves, which is a list of what should be learned each year. So that's why Indiana had been a Common Core state. Reverse course and pulled out. Oklahoma had been a Common Core state. First pulled out of PARCC, then pulled out of Common Core completely. Bobby Jindal in Louisiana wants to pull out of, it's also a PARCC state, wants to pull out of Common Core. In fact, in less than 1 month from today, there will be a federal court in Baton Rouge that will have a hearing on whether Louisiana, he's basically sued the federal government to say these federal dollars should not be tied to what should be a state issue. And we'll see what happens with Louisiana. So states are pulling out. Even some of the biggest supporters of Common Core, the biggest supporters, understand, of Common Core, have said, well, maybe it'd be a good idea if not all the schools in the state applied these Common Core standards and these assessments. Maybe as many as 10% of the schools should not even participate in Common Core, even in a Common Core state. Some supporters have said that. In fact, one guy, his name is, let's see, it's like a P. Oh my gosh, that's you, Petrilli. Mike Petrilli said himself that maybe 10% of the schools in a state, in a Common Core state, shouldn't even be following the Common Core standards. Well, the logic he applies for why some, maybe 10%, should be allowed to innovate is the logic I apply to 100%. I think it'd be great for 100% of the schools to innovate, 100% of the teachers to feel freer in the development of what they want to do. There are alternatives to Common Core, like the series of Stanford tests, Stanford 9 and 10. Ultimately, I feel it'd be better for multiple kinds of majors. In other words, this consolidation thought form, I think, should be broken. Does it make sense for a vocational school that's going to train welders and electricians to give the same assessments and measure kids the same way as a kid that maybe is going to be a heart surgeon or a trial lawyer? Does that make sense to everyone here? Wouldn't it be better if different kinds of schools could develop that would serve different kinds of kids? And if you test them all the same, and you grade all those teachers the same, basically because the teacher evaluation is tied to how these kids do on this one-size-fits-all test, is that a model for making us all the best we can be? When there are perfectly good jobs, as Mike Rowe will tell you, the Dirty Jobs guy, there are perfectly good jobs that Americans should be proud to have and shouldn't be shamed for having or dissuaded from having just because they don't involve college. Data collection is a huge thing too. CCD means a lot of things. It's a charge-coupled device in electronics. It's Catholic church term. It also means Common Core of Data. You can go on a national website right now, which I pulled up, and I was going to pull up over there, from the U.S. Department of Education, Common Core of Data. They say they want to collect data on not just teachers and schools, but students. Demographic data in a national database. And look, I love laughing at conspiracy theorists as much as the next guy, but when Edward Snowden kind of came forward and it became clear that, yeah, the government really can monitor all the phone calls if they want, it does raise some concerns about a national database of child data and how smart you are and what that could be used for in the future. It's troubling to a lot of people, including me. There is certainly a lot of federal money that's billions of dollars in front of this, not just from the federal government, but also national groups like the Gates Foundation, who, let's face it, there is a connection. Tests would be given on a lot of Windows machines. You can say Bill Gates is no longer a Microsoft guy, he's now just an independent philanthropist, but it's fair to say that a lot of these Windows computers that we're running these very tests, the Gates Foundation has spread billions of dollars across the country to help foster more and more of these tests. And so, again, I wanted to, we'll talk more as we go, and I was asked to just speak a couple minutes. But yes, so to me, the way forward, I respect Governor Kane a lot. I just have a principal disagreement with the idea that we have either Common Core or no way forward. The way forward is choice, diversity, competition, and maybe those things we should follow more. Thank you.
Very well said. So, Karen, why don't we start with try a little rebuttal. Bob said a lot of things there. He said that this is a one-size-fits-all solution that is kind of opposed to this idea around choice and diversity and competition. He pointed to the states that are pulling out of the standards or reassessments, that this leads to issues around data privacy, that there's issues around the federal government, around Gates' role. So take a crack at any or all of the above. Just keep it short.
Well, thank you, Mike. I'm glad to be here. And I just want to say that my overarching philosophical view here is one that you can't have choice without real information. And so what we're trying to do is give parents the actual real information to make informed choices. Right now they have no information and they can't make real choices based on the facts that they don't know exactly what an A in algebra means. They don't know what it means in their own state, let alone what it means state to state. So I think what my philosophical general operating principle here is that I do believe in choice. And I really believe in local control here. But you can't, but we've actually, I'll just quote one of my favorite governors, Bill Haslam of Tennessee, who said on a live phone call with reporters, these exact words: "We had a definition of proficiency that was essentially dishonest to parents." So here you have a politician coming clean about the fact that we were setting proficiency rates that were convenient for politicians and not good for kids and parents. And we have to solve that. And so what I would actually ask Bob is, right now, according to his own data from his excellent and awesome documentary, is that we have 23% of our kids in the United States who are proficient in math. 23%. You're not going to go from 23% proficiency to calculus. You're not going to do it. We've got to decide what is the level of proficiency that we expect a high school graduating person to know, so that, as the governor said, and I think the gentleman from Prudential said, so they have choices for what's next. So that success is truly next for them, whatever that choice is. So, I'm not going to tell you that it's perfect. I don't think we've ever had standards that were perfect. Clearly, by the numbers that we're seeing in the country, we don't have standards that have been perfect. There are great concerns that the folks who oppose Common Core are raising, and I think we can have a rational conversation around. I think data privacy is one of them. But we have to start being honest, and we have to start deciding when we want the truth. Do we want the truth in 2nd and 3rd grade when we have kids that aren't reading at grade level? Or do we want the truth when they're coming to this college and 80% of them need to do do-over courses? I don't call them remediation, I call them do-over. They have to pay for the stuff they should have learned in high school. That's not an acceptable situation. It's financially devastating for a lot of kids, especially more low-income kids who get into college and are so excited and then show up and find out they got to pay for classes that actually don't advance them. And so they're dropping out with debt and no degree, and we're ruining them. So I haven't really stuck to my script here. I hope I've addressed some of the issues that Bob raised, but I think we have to really get back to the basics of deciding what do we think it means to graduate from high school, and what basic level of knowledge do we think kids should know in order to go to the next step and be successful in that next step, whatever that is for them. We've got 30% of kids in the country right now who can't pass the basic military entrance exam. So that choice is not available to them. And that's just on academics. That has nothing to do with physical fitness. So if college is not a real choice because they have to do over for maybe an entire year, and the military is not a choice, and our business leaders are telling us that they're spending millions and millions of dollars re-educating these folks in the workforce as they come out of high school or even college, you know, that's a real wake-up call. And all the standards are designed to do is create the benchmarks. What should a third grader know to go to fourth grade? What should a sixth grader know to go to seventh grade? And what should that high school diploma mean? That's all they're designed to do. States get to change them, add to them. They get to actually say, for advanced students, we want to add calculus or calculus 2, or chemistry 2. You know, they get to decide, but we need a level playing field across states so that we have real information. So we know if New Jersey schools are as good as Iowa schools or Massachusetts schools, so that we have real information that informs choice. So I think that
That's excellent. By the way, it is Karen's birthday today. She's here celebrating her birthday. Tom Corey. How else would you want to celebrate her birthday? All right, so...
to be nice to me.
Yes, exactly. Be nice to her.
It's a sympathetic move.
Exactly. You like that? I'm a pro, Bob. So, Bob, a little bit of a rebuttal here. So Karen says, look, you know, you're a choice guy, she's a choice gal, I'm a choice guy. A lot of people here believe in school choice. It is hard for parents to make good choices if they don't have good information. The information that states like New Jersey that they were producing before were highly misleading, right? They'd say, everybody's proficient, everybody's doing great. So it was hard to differentiate between schools. The hope now is that we're going to give a much more honest assessment of how schools are doing against this the higher standard, which is college and career. So what do you say to that?
It's certainly true that when the No Child Left Behind state tests were developed all around the country, states made those tests easy. They made them very easy. Why? Because they wanted to look good. And when you give sort of the bureaucracy a chance to decide their own grading system, oftentimes it turns out the grading system is easy. So that's correct. But just because the state test, you could just change the cut scores, as I said. You could just change the definition of what passing is. You could keep the exact same NJ test that we've had and just change the definition of what proficient is, and we would immediately recalibrate that. So that doesn't argue for a one-size-fits-all kind of federal test or two sets of tests, if you want to be more specific. To say, you can be honest with a whole number of different kinds of tests, in other words. We also, in terms of, she was saying at the end about comparing New Jersey schools to Massachusetts schools or Minnesota schools or other higher performance states. You can do that now through what's called the National NAEP test. There are ways to calibrate both the state test and this national test, which is given in all 50 states by the U.S. Department of Education. And you can calibrate that. There's a website called Global Report Card, in fact, where you can go in and find out how every single district in the country would rank on an international scale if that were a country. If your school district were a country right now, you can go to this website and see how it would compare to Singapore, how it would compare to Canada, or different places around the world. I do agree with what you said about the awesome documentary part. That part, yes, that part and in terms of choice, yes, I'm glad to see that. I think probably here, by the nature of this group and its name, everyone here believes in choice. We run an event every year called the New Jersey School Choice Summit every January for National School Choice Week, and I would invite you guys to all be a part of that too. And that's going to be in Canada this year, and a lot of changes going on around the state. But ultimately, what I want to say is that the part department can add to standards over and above. This is the last point I'll make. That, yes, it stops at Algebra 2. Nothing stops a teacher from teaching trigonometry or school, from building that into the curriculum, or calculus, or all the above. The question is, what teachers' evaluations are directly tied to tests that don't test those things? You have to ask yourself where the incentives are going to be for teachers to teach things that they know their students won't be evaluated on, and they won't be evaluated on. If you were a teacher, what would you do? Wouldn't your incentives be to drive up the number of kids that are really good at Algebra 2 and not worry so much about the kids that have already mastered Algebra 2 and could be learning calculus, when your own evaluation is based on things that have nothing to do with calculus? That's the direction in it.
Okay, and Karen, a chance for rebuttal, maybe on that last point on teacher evaluations. Also maybe on the point around federal involvement. That, of course, is a big issue for many folks on the right, appropriately so.
Right, so I first want to take on the test issue, and the issue that just changing the cut scores would solve this. I heard a teacher describe the difference between the old and the new standards this way. It's the difference between water skiing and scuba diving. In water skiing, you cover a lot of territory skimming over the top. But in scuba diving, you get to dive deep, and you get to really see and learn what's there, and you get to really understand. And that is what the difference here is that we're trying to give kids the skills to actually think and test how they think, not just allow them to fill in bubbles that say that I can get to the right answer, right? We want to know if they've actually mastered the concept and can explain it, can provide evidence for how they've arrived at that right answer. So we're teaching them earlier critical thinking skills that they're going to need in the workforce, that they're going to need in college, and to take that next step in career. So just changing the cut score and just having the same old fill-in-the-bubble tests doesn't actually change the situation with the fact that our kids may be able to get a good grade on a test and go to the next level without having actually mastered the material. So that's number one. Number two, in terms of what incentive is there for the teacher to teach beyond what they're testing, that's a really cynical view, in my opinion, and doesn't really take into account the power of local control. Local communities get to decide these issues. Local communities and parents and those educators get to decide that they're going to have their kids, help hold their kids to a higher standard. That's exactly what the power of these standards do, is basically say once you've mastered the basics and get all the kids to that mastery level, you can conquer the world, you can go move on. You can let kids skip to we talk about the standards as stair steps. Some kids are going to take stairs 2 at a time. Let them go, and give the teachers the tools and the infrastructure to let those kids excel. So I think that's a real cynical view, and it takes actually out the fact that parents can demand locally that their schools do better than this. That's absolutely still within the power of what the Common Core standards are about.
Okay, very good. Thank you. We could have this debate. We have had this debate for a much longer time, but we want to pivot now to talk some about implementation. There was one question from the audience, or it might have been from the internets, about what are we talking about here when we're talking about Common Core standards? What are they? Let me take that very briefly, and then you guys can fill in if you want, which is that the idea with standards, this has been around for decades, is basically a list of what kids should know and be able to do by the end of each grade. Right? And we talk a lot about how standards are not supposed to be curriculum. Curriculum is where you get much more details and you fill in a lot of the details about what happens on a day-to-day basis. The standards are much more about the skills and the knowledge that kids need to have by the end of each year. Now, there's plenty of debate about where the standards end and curriculum begins, and I would argue that certainly standards do influence curriculum, there's no doubt. If they say in the math standards, for example, you have to learn standard algorithms, the research says that you shouldn't be using calculators in first grade. I mean, those sorts of things certainly have an impact on the curriculum. I encourage people to choose a curriculum that goes in one direction or another, but it doesn't point to say there's only one curriculum that matches the standards. There's lots of stuff. And what we're going to hear from our next panelist is to hear about, for one thing, how do local schools in New Jersey select the curriculum and the books and everything else that goes along with those standards. And I'll be curious to know whether they're finding materials that they think are a good match. So, Vincent, let's start with you from the school board perspective. How's it going out there? What are some of the major challenges? sort of what's going well, what's not going so well, and do your schools feel ready? They're going to be taking these much more difficult assessments just, what, 4 or 5 months from now. What can we expect?
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to address this audience today, and I really appreciate the sponsors providing this opportunity for people to really have a conversation. I think it's important that you have a little bit of a background as well. Number one is that I am a practitioner. I spent 34 years in schools, everything from a teacher. I'm proud that I'm one of the very first nationally board certified teachers in the nation. And I spent time as an administrator as well in a high-performing district just to the south here, South Brunswick, over 20 years there, and then another 15 years in a district which is achieving with a 40% poverty rate and a very evolving community, which is North Brunswick. So I come to this table having left the district about a year and a half ago, and actually when I came here this morning, I was on a panel just a few weeks ago, debate with a couple of the national speakers in Ridgewood. And quite frankly, I have a lot of passion for this. I have a lot of emotions for this. I especially do for a couple of different reasons. Primarily, I'm a father and a grandfather. I have a 2-year-old grandson and a 4-month-old granddaughter. And I'm very concerned, the country, the nation, the state of what we're going to be leaving after 20 years. I also had an opportunity to attend an event in Vineland a few weeks ago. And I say that because my primary responsibility in school boards is to ensure that the 5,000 school board members that are a part of this process and 81 of the 87 charter school boards of trustees that have voluntarily joined New Jersey school boards are fully informed. What's disturbing to me is that the discourse is not always about what the topic is. What's disturbing to me is that not all the information is being put forth, which is why this panel is extremely important today. Because there are those who are out there saying things which are really offensive. And to those of you who were in Ridgewood a few weeks ago when I was emotional, I apologize to you. But my emotions were real. The reason is that those who are supporting the Common Core by a group known as Concerned Citizens of South Jersey and Freedom Works had several national speakers, and this was the quote in their book: "He alone who owns the youth gains the future." Adolf Hitler. Don't let history repeat itself. With all due respect, we have significant challenges before us today. It was so enlightening to hear Governor Kane speak in detail about the challenges we face. It's so enlightening to hear both Mike and Bob, because this is an issue which needs to be fully explored. But it's also disturbing when we hear the other half of the story. And this is not about criticizing any of the panelists. It's about criticizing those who are making very bold public statements. James Milgren and Sam Stotsky are two of the major people who are traveling the country. As a matter of fact, Sam Stotsky, Duke Pesta, Chris Tenkin are traveling this state. And in, a Pioneer Institute white paper, July 2010, submitted by Stotsky with Milgram. And I just want to read Milgram's quote. "Overall, only the very best state math standards, those of California, Massachusetts, Indiana, and Minnesota, are stronger than these standards. Most states would be far better off adopting the Common Core math standards than keeping their current standards. However, California and the other states with top standards would almost certainly be better off by keeping their current standards." My points are that we can evaluate the objections of these national speakers. And what we learn it's half the story. When Dr. Stotsky criticizes the validation committee and says that there were no content specialists, in Ridgewood what she said was, what she means by a content specialist was that you must have a PhD. She discounted Dorothy Strickland from Rutgers. She discounted 15 other national figures in education in both math and language arts who did endorse the Common Core standards. Now, I am not here to suggest to you that these standards are perfect. I don't believe they are as an educator. But I also don't believe that there are any, or will any ever be a perfect set of standards. In New Jersey, we have been revising standards for 20 years. In New Jersey, educators believe that standards for each grade level are the floor. In other words, the minimum basic skills at that grade level, the expectations. Dr. Stotsky disagrees completely. When confronted with that comment, she said no. If they're not the floor, they must be the ceiling. We have a lot of work to do, but the focus has to be on a few different things. Number one is, do we agree that there should be standards at all? Chris Dinkin from Seton Hall says no, as we said originally. Dr. Stotsky has endorsed standards. Now we get into, should they be common standards? Is there a weakness, is there a strength? The focus has got to be on how we are going to ensure that every child, regardless of their zip code, regardless of their birth circumstances, have equity and an opportunity to seize in order to grow. And the conversation must return to that topic and not these extraneous information that is coming out from those who are just advocating against standards.
So Vincent, all very well said. Tell me from the school board perspective, what are some of the challenges you're seeing out there? For example, school boards are in charge in New Jersey, I assume, in adopting the curriculum and making sure teachers have the training they need. Are they finding good materials out there? Is that a struggle? What are you hearing from them?
Well, I think it's important to know that school boards are charged with overseeing, and the actual work is being done by the practitioners, by the administrators, by the teachers. In the best areas, that should be done collaboratively. And yes, there is a review at the governance level, as there should be, and will continue to be. There's a lot of misinformation. There are many publishers that have put that sticker, Common Core prepared, Common Core approved. When you go deeper into it, the Common Core has not approved one book, as they're not approving those types of things. Professional development is critical. Professional development has occurred and will continue to occur. From the school board level, it's our responsibility, usually school boards, to provide the information so that they understand the challenges that those in their districts are facing, and to ensure that they are meeting the state standards in terms of PD as they're being released, and the other factors that impact it. But the other thing that is critical is to separate the three initiatives. By not separating the Common Core from the assessments, from the evaluation, we're weakening the three conversations. Quite frankly, because of some of the distractions, we're not having those conversations regarding evaluations. We're not having conversations regarding the role of practice within the evaluation system. Right now, it's set in New Jersey at 10%. As administrators become even more qualified in terms of the implementation of having a standard high of how they're evaluating classrooms, the role of practice will probably and should be increased. But we have to get to that point and have those conversations together.
All right, well, finally, we're going to hear from Patricia, who is down in the middle of this, on the ground, working with the principals. So tell us, how is it going? What are the challenges? What's going well? Are you ready for these new tougher assessments coming soon?
We're ready. And I want to say this, I am so happy to be here today because I really want to bring the conversation back to the context in New Jersey. New Jersey is very different from any other state. We have had, as Governor King pointed out, a long history of setting standards, 20 years of setting standards. We have always worked in our schools with standards, and we've always revised them based on the growing needs of students in our ever-changing society. So that's why all the major educational organizations in New Jersey, including the New Jersey Principals and Supervisors Association, the PTA, the Superintendents Association, the Teachers Association, really support the Common Core standards. They know that it's our history of having standards in New Jersey that has allowed New Jersey to place either 1 or 2 on many rankings nationally of student achievement. Also, I'd just like to point out a few positive things. Most recently, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, in its recent grading of education in the states, gives New Jersey an A in the categories of academic achievement. A in the category of academic achievement for low-income and minority students. A in post-secondary and workplace readiness, and A in international competitiveness. We don't need to compare ourselves to other states at this point. Our work in our schools with Common Core standards began in 2010. We in the field have been working tirelessly to implement these standards since 2010. That means that, and as a matter of fact, at that time I was a chief school administrator, and in my own district, as we implemented the new Common Core standards and looking at the current standards in New Jersey, there was not that big of a leap to where we were going. Yes, there are shifts in those standards, but we had always been raising the bar. So this is just another step. The standards, by the way, what schools are working on right now is still refining their curriculum. And let me make a couple of things clear. Standards are not curriculum. Textbooks are not curriculum. Curriculum is the basis of educational practice in New Jersey. It means that educators have to get together, unpack those Common Core standards into specific learning goals that will drive their lesson planning, that will help them to create ongoing assessments in the classroom to see how students are doing in terms of achieving those standards. And it allows them to actually have time to vet the instructional materials, the resources, the technology applications that are required to make sure that they're high quality and make sure that they're aligned to those higher standards. And like with anything new, with any profession, teachers, principals, everyone in the profession who is busy in schools today implementing this have required great professional learning opportunities. There is a need to support professional development right now in our schools. One way that NJPSA is doing this, as a matter of fact, is really to focus that training for our administrators and the teachers who attend our trainings on the fact that the Common Core is just one initiative. But the standards are something we've always dealt with. What we also have is we also have teacher evaluation. And the point is, these are not disparate. They're not disparate initiatives. When working together, Common Core, PARC, evaluation are the backbone of a true school improvement process that your principals, your superintendents, and your teachers are busy working at right now, trying to make those reforms work in a way that our ultimate goal, and every educator in New Jersey can say this, our ultimate goal is not to, have these battles about these reforms, but to really look at the value of the reforms and try to implement them in an educationally sound way so that they make a difference at the classroom level for students in the classroom, because that's what this is all about. So that continuing focus on instruction, that more focus on teaching and learning, has really caused the job of the principal to shift. We have now become less managers of buildings and more instructional leaders. And with that requires shifts in district office, in school boards looking at ways to support principals, to allow them the time that they need to work with their staffs. And that brings up another need. While we're arguing about the Common Core, which has been in place since 2010, let's not forget that we have other needs to support our work. One of those is really looking at the time that we have in our schools for professional learning, that's job embedded, where teachers and administrators can have time to really look at curriculum, instruction, assessment, and have deeper conversations about teaching and learning. That's what this is all about. So we need to find ways to reorganize time in school to provide that opportunity. And time is our biggest resource right now, all right? Schools have experienced several changes in recent years, and time is needed to support proper implementation of these changes in a meaningful and sustainable way. No one in our schools wants to do anything haphazardly, halfway, because we know that we're there to support support the academic achievement of our students. And so we are there to make sure that these reforms are put into place in a very thoughtful and positive way so that they reach the impact that they intended to have, improve student achievement in New Jersey.
Okay. It's exciting to hear from the field and get back into the classroom here. Patricia, I'm curious how it's playing out in New Jersey. If you go into most districts in New Jersey, do you see teachers creating their own curriculum? Or is this about trying to find good materials out there, textbooks, digital materials, etc.? There's some national resources now, like what New York developed, New York Engaged. But I'm just curious how this is playing out, particularly in a state where you have so many of these tiny little school districts, right? Not a lot of districts probably have the money to have separate curriculum people. So how does this look like?
I think that the curriculum has been the missing link in all of these conversations. First of all, let's really look at what is curriculum. Many people think it's a textbook. Many people think it's just some document that's put on a shelf that we look at once in a while. But really, curriculum is what guides instruction. And so embedded in that curriculum, as districts develop their own curriculum, and in many places in our counties, we have county consortiums who have gotten together to develop curriculum in the areas to help alleviate the one school district issues. But what we're doing is really what teachers do with curriculum as they develop, they're part of the development process, is to look at the standards, unpack them into clear, specific learning objectives, and look at what, first of all, how will they assess the learning goals of their lessons to make sure students are achieving all the way through their units of study. And then finally, what materials, what strategies, what technology applications would best be used to address these learning goals. And that's what teachers were trained for. This is why they're certified in New Jersey as teachers, to use their expertise to build a curriculum. And that's really the hard work. That's what they're engaged in. So we can't forget and assume that just curriculum magically appears. This is something that has to be refined over time. And when given the opportunity to work collaboratively in teams and schools, teachers are always reflecting on that curriculum and using student data information to change it, to revise it, to find something even better to utilize. It's always a continuous learning process and a continuous improvement process.
And if parents are seeing stuff come home, there's been a lot of complaints nationally, for example, about these math worksheets that are coming home. It seems to be usually in the 3rd, 4th, 5th grade when you're shifting. Hopefully the kids have mastered their arithmetic. Now they're trying to teach them to understand what's going on behind the arithmetic. But some of these worksheets, you look at them and they're so confusing, they're so convoluted. And parents get angry and they hear about Common Core and this faraway thing. They feel like they have no power to fix it. But it sounds like what I'm hearing is they can still go down to their school board and ask the local school board, hey, why are you using this material instead of that material? Is that fair? And I don't want to get, I see Bob wants to, it's not, I think that's, you're outnumbered, but I want to hear about that. I mean, because this is a real problem. We are seeing real problems out there with some materials that are poorly designed, and parents are frustrated, and they go online and they quickly feel like they have no power over fixing this. How, in New Jersey, how should that play out? Vince, you first, and let's get on.
In New Jersey, nothing has changed. In New Jersey, we expect parents to go to that teacher first. They may go to the principal, but hopefully the principal will say, talk to the teacher. And at that point, then it may go to the principal, and absolutely there is recourse. Every school board holds at least one open meeting a month. Every school board has a public portion. Every school board invites the public, and the public does participate. On the other hand, the standards have been here. The processes are in place to address standards regardless of what they are. And that includes professional learning communities. That includes professional development. That includes the conversations. And quite frankly, those conversations have occurred and will continue regardless of what the standards will be. It's good educational practice. But then it becomes leadership. Because this is not about the teacher. It is about the school board, but it's specifically about the building and the district leadership that is encouraging and facilitating those conversations. And quite frankly, it is about that collaboration. To see a third grade teacher isolated and working alone is not going to create a good curriculum, a good instructional practice, or a good understanding of data, regardless of what the standard is. It comes down to that communication and feedback.
And Bob, what do you think?
Yeah, so if you're wondering if people are frustrated by Common Core questions that come back as homework, I would say ask Louis C.K. Louis C.K., the comedian, who went on the Letterman show and talked about, we've seen a lot of these examples, but the idea that a parent can go to a school board meeting and speak and be heard, we know that they can sign up to speak. The idea that they'll be taken seriously, I think, is, I don't know if you guys have talked to your parents, thank you. The idea that they'll be taken seriously, at least in many, many districts out of our 600, it's just not true at all. It's a huge stretch for many of the districts. Perhaps there are some where they are taken seriously, but many, they feel ignored. I hear from them all the time. And even if, let's imagine for a moment, they were given the most full airing of their concerns and really were listened to, and this was a great school, you'd still have to imagine a scenario where some percentage of the parents, not a majority, might object to a certain thing. Maybe, let's say 30% of the parents object to the way Common Core math is taught in third grade, come to the school board and say so. The school board might say, well, but the 70% feels this other way, so we're going to just go with them because we have to have one model be applied to everyone. So that's basically, that's the core of my disagreement about the whole thing. If we look, we have a state where seniority protects teachers. All right, if layoffs have to happen because enrollment drops in our state today, even after what was allegedly a tenure reform law was passed, if I've worked 5 years in the district and she's worked 4 years in the district, and she works really hard and is an excellent teacher, and I phone it in every day because I don't really care that much, you know what? She loses her job and I keep her. That's what we have in this state today. That's unfair to children, it's unfair to families. And there are problems like that are far deeper than if you just hand someone a new set of standards and you give children a new set of tests. The idea that will make some of these chronically failing schools suddenly good, it's just a joke. It's not going to happen. We'll be here 5 years from now, we'll have the same conversation, and many of those same failing schools will sadly still be failing, even under a Common Core era. So,
Right. And these are strong arguments. And by the way, I think that this organization is going to be hosting many more of these sorts of forums about issues around school choice, around teacher evaluations, and others. I think all of us would agree this is only one piece in the puzzle, right? I've got several questions here that I will start asking, but I would also encourage the audience. We have the microphone somewhere, I think. Yes, organizers, who's got it? To ask. A lot of these are fundamental questions about the Common Core. We'll ask some of them. Also, I would particularly encourage you if you have a question about implementation, since that is our assigned topic. So if you've got a question, raise your hand. In the meantime, I'll start asking some of these other questions. Several have come in about whether Common Core is developmentally appropriate. There's been concerns about in the early grades in particular, about whether the standards are too challenging for what most young children can handle, whether the focus on teaching a lot of content, a lot more core knowledge in the early grades is developmentally appropriate. Anybody want to quickly handle that one?
It's been said that kindergarten is the new first grade. It's been said that pre-K is where a lot of foundational information is happening. Quite frankly, there's something called differentiation, and differentiation also would address some of Bob's concerns. Teachers are expected to differentiate instruction based on a child's needs and where that child is at that time. Teachers are expected to develop specific learning experiences tailored to meet those individual needs. It doesn't matter if it's a standard or what it is. One size doesn't fit all for anyone. Kids develop at individual rates and individual paces. Under effective academic leadership, we would expect that there would be that type of collaboration, that type of discussion, and also an acceptance that depending upon where a child is, that is where the teacher meets that child. The end game is graduation at the end of grade 12. That's it.
And then a related question, maybe for Patricia. Several questions out in the audience saying, this seems like an untested idea. Why didn't we pilot test it, or how do we know that this is going to work? I mean, address this. Is this kind of a big experiment that we're trying out on this grand scale that hasn't been tried out before?
Well, I'd like to repeat that New Jersey has always adopted standards, and as Finn said, we have processes in place in our school that as standards change, and as we constantly revise them to meet the needs of students, and our school board looks at them, and all organizations and public have a chance to comment at them, which happened in 2010 when we adopted them, that we've always had these procedures in place. And this is not, dealing with educational standards is not new to those who are implementing in the field. What is new to those who are implementing in the field is the learning that must occur by teachers, by administrators, about the shifts that are occurring in the Common Core. And those shifts are occurring for a reason. They're occurring so that we can make students college and career ready. Some of the shifts in the Common Core have to do with critical thinking, problem solving, the ability to collaborate with others, to work on teams. Those, by the way, are all part of the 21st century skills standards that New Jersey adopted several years ago. So we have been utilizing these higher level standards for a while now. And so, I think that in New Jersey is in a whole different place than many of the other states who are first embracing these standards. For example, if you look at a state who before all they ever had was a test at the end that was multiple choice. We did away with multiple choice testing for our students years ago. We've always shifted our state testing as our standards have risen. We've shifted the testing in the state too to match those rising standards with open-ended questions, with more explanation about how to solve a problem, because we thought that was important in New Jersey. And so we have always continued to do that. So this really is just a next step, but it does require a lot of professional development and learning and collaboration.
That's good. And, it is fair to say, New Jersey should know this, that you have, as a state, made huge progress in student achievement. And I think you are right behind Massachusetts and Florida in terms of states that have made big gains, particularly for low-income kids. That doesn't mean, Bob's right, there's still a whole lot of incredibly low-performing schools in some of the urban areas. And so it may be that standards-based reform can be quite successful statewide, particularly in school districts that that are not the most challenged school districts. It may be they need a very different kind of strategy for the most challenged districts out there in the state.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Yeah.
Why would it be a good idea for up to 10% of the schools to opt out of the Common Core?
So the argument I made in that article was that there are some schools, like some charter schools or other kind of specialty schools, where there may be parents and educators that have a strong feeling about wanting to use a totally different approach, maybe something that's very progressive or very traditional, and that there should be room in our system, again, I'm a choice guy, to allow for those kinds of different kinds of approaches. And so if a school wants to make the case to the state that we have a very different approach and we think we have another way to measure student outcomes that's rigorous, and the state can look at that and say, okay, you're going to look at long-term outcomes around college going, or you're a career technical school, you're going to look at long-term outcomes on labor outcomes, on career prospects. I think we should be open to that. I mean, all of these things, let's be honest, that we are trying to figure out how to design a system for a lot of kids, none of whom are going to go the exact same route. We want to raise standards and expectations, but we also want there to be some flexibility and innovation. So it's about getting that balance right. All right, the last question we will go with right here in the front row, and then I think we will take a break, right? Okay.
All right. Name Dean Prudhomme, Kansas. Wow. Man. All right. Where's Common Core with special education? I mean, special education right now, to educate a special needs kid, all the money in the world. But then there's another side that you cannot retain the special ed kids. That makes no sense, and that needs to be worked out because that's just warehouse. Now,
All right, so that's good. Let's take that question because we're running out of time. So let's talk about Patricia and Vincent. How does this work for special education students? This seems like a big challenge, perhaps, for kids who may, particularly for kids who might have cognitive disabilities. But go ahead, tell us about the special education.
Well, again, from the implementation point of view, we have always had special education needs, ELL needs, English language learner needs. we have diverse populations, so as Vince mentioned before, no matter what the standards are, educators differentiate and provide needed supports in whatever areas for those learners to get them as far as possible in meeting those particular standards. Because we don't want to assume that because someone has special learning disabilities or is ELL, they do not have the abilities to reach those standards. In many cases, they do. And there are ways that educators work consistently to differentiate their instruction to meet the needs of every learner in their classroom.
I just want to also add that individual education plans, IEPs, drive that student's educational plan, and including assessments or lack of participation in assessments.
Assessment not being done right, implementation is not done right, it's wrong. But the other question,
I'm sorry, sir. I just want to make sure everybody's got a chance to take a quick break since we've been plowing through already. We are going to take a 10-minute break before we start the second panel. Please join me in thanking our great panel to get us started today. Coffee, if you get the back, we'll start getting in 10 minutes.
I'd like to tell you that we have in addition to the second panel, I made a statement earlier on that the New Jersey Education Association had declined to participate. We do have someone from the HAA here who will, I'm pleased to say, who will be introduced by our moderator. The moderator is John Mooney, who had a sterling career as an education writer for Star Ledger and was a founding editor and is the chief education writer for NJSCERA. Ladies and gentlemen, John Mooney.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here, and thank you all, the organizers of this, for the invitation to be part of this conference. And really, for me, it's an opportunity to speak to some of the top political players in the state in terms of education policy. The added bonus of this is I get to interview them in front of all of you. So they're in a position where they at least maybe less inclined not to answer my questions or yours. So I look forward to this. I will add also that there's a story likely coming out of this panel, and it will probably be running tomorrow if I get my act together and write it. And that will be at njspotlight.com, a little self-promotion there. So please, if you don't know our site, visit it. If you do know our site, be sure to read it tomorrow. Obviously a big issue, Common Core, it's a big issue facing the state, and really a long-running one. It predates, as the first panel talked about, as well as Governor Kane, it predates the Common Core itself. I remember when I covered education in the state for about 20 years, and one of the first issues in the mid-90s was the core curriculum content standards. And that was in 7, maybe 8 areas. I can't remember exactly, maybe even 9 different curriculum areas. And that went through its own different iterations over the years. And then we came to Common Core state standards, which, as was discussed, were adopted in 2010 by the State Board of Education. I will say as a journalist, it was somewhat quiet. It was not, given all the rancor that's around it now, that was not the case in 2010. I think a lot of folks didn't quite, it was talked about, and we were all aware of it, and it was all on paper, but the real impact of it, as we're seeing now, wasn't really felt yet. And it did not have a tremendous amount of discussion at the time. But obviously that has changed in the years since, and the politics has only heated up, in large part for a couple reasons in my mind, and we're going to explore those. But certainly the testing that was accompanying it with PARC, which is now, as you all know, is going to be taking place this year, this spring, and also the accountability pieces that have been connected with it towards certainly, especially teachers, but also schools and districts as a whole. So we have, as I said, we have a really top-flight panel that hopefully can explore some of these issues. I'll quickly introduce them, though. They certainly, as Governor Kane also did, they don't need any introduction. Literally, Michael Petrilli doesn't need introduction because he was the moderator of the last panel. So, President of Thomas Fordham Foundation, Senate President Steve Sweeney, Democrat of Gloucester County, Assembly Speaker Vincent Prieto, Democrat of Hudson County, Assemblyman Declan O'Scanlan, Republican of Monmouth County, and our late addition, welcome, Amy Franz, who's the Associate Director of the Division for Professional Development and Instructional Issues for the NJEA, New Jersey Education Association. So first of all, I mean, I went around the room with some of my friends out there and asked them, what should I ask these guys? And a few folks said, well, let's get them on the record of where they stand on these issues. Let's start with that. And there are some bills, currently and prior in prior legislatures that relate to Common Core. There was one bill that would have delayed it last year that I don't think went anywhere, but it was out there. And there certainly continue to be some bills on delaying the use of park assessments for evaluation and accountability purposes. So, I guess I go down the line a little bit on this, on where you stand on some of these issues, on some of the broader issues, and even on some of the specific bills. And we'll start at the end. Senator O'Scanlan, give us your sense of where you stand on these broad issues.
I'm a big supporter of standards that we can use to compare our children against children in adjoining districts, in the state and in other states. They ultimately have to compete in the world. So that's the biggest picture perspective. I support standards that, again, you can compare from area to area, region to region, and ultimately we need to compare our kids to how they perform throughout the world. That having been said, I think that we have to accept that this is an experiment. I don't think it's an experiment that's going to destroy our children or turn them into drones, but we have to be flexible and we have to watch as this is implemented and be responsive to that. And I think the legislature is ready to do that, and the governor ultimately is as well. As far as parks tests go, I think that after having done a lot of research on this, because I've got a lot of parents in my district who come to see me about it, yes, does it take up some more time? Yes. We've all heard the negatives, I don't have to reiterate them. But ultimately, we need to arrive at an effective test that is consistent throughout regions and throughout the country in order to be able to assess and know where we are most wisely investing our education dollars and to know who's doing the best job, who's not, and then figure out how to improve the ones that aren't, and export the good policies to the ones that are. So I'm sympathetic to both PARC and Common Core, but I'm open to the fact that we should be rigid about how we move forward.
Speaker Prieto.
Kind of a complex question, believe it or not, in my mind. Common Core standards, when you take it for the value, I think it's a great thing. I think you have everybody on the same page, that you could have mobility from one school to another, from one district to another, from one state to another. But saying that, when you look at the reality and the challenges that you have in different areas of the state, whether there's language barriers or many different aspects or social and economic differences, you have to take those things into account. When I read about the standards, they're not a curriculum, so they are a standard, but then I see sort of conflicting on it, so that's why I do think it has to be an experiment phase of it, because then they talk to the teacher who will set the curriculum and teach at the pace that they need for their students. So that actually is contradictory to the first thing that I said, being on the same page, everybody being the same. We actually did pass a bill out of the Assembly earlier this year that it was about delaying the park and just receiving implementation. I spoke to somebody the other day, and I firmly believe, and usually from my background as building trades, is you need to have a good foundation to see how forward you can build that building. So that, when we get our kids from either pre-K or kindergarten and you start early, absolutely, you can do many things. In the higher grades, it becomes more difficult, a larger challenge. And actually, I do my due diligence and look at it. I did take the park, and I took seeing a sample test, and I saw that, and I believe, and I can be corrected if I'm wrong, it talks about math, edition for second grade, then fourth grade, multiplication and division. I saw fourth grade, the first question. I sort of challenged some high school kids to really answer that question. So I think it's going to be an interesting concept, trying to get this accomplished. Commissioner Hasby's here, and I give him a lot of credit, how we can do this. And it's going to be a sort of a period that will evolve itself. So there's no easy answer here. So there's a lot of, for me, there's a lot of questions, and I need forums like this to educate me even further on the decisions that we make.
The speaker, I think are in the same place. The concept of Common Core, I think, is great. It's the implementation that's really the issue, John. And how do we make it work? My son is a first-year social studies teacher, and I can't tell you how proud I am. He got through, and he started talking to me about the struggles that he's had with, he's half a dozen kids with IEPs in his classroom. There's an expectation of advancement, as the speaker said, and this is too important, not to get it right. The Assembly passed the bill, and the Senate didn't, because we went to the administration, and I want to thank the Commissioner. I think we're very fortunate to have Commissioner Heskey back. I think he's crazy to come back, but I think we're fortunate to have him back because he was able to bring all the parties together. And we came up with a compromise at the end. And compromise isn't a bad thing, John. It's not a bad thing at all. And most importantly, it was a parts test. I don't think anybody's against it. Everyone I talk to is in favor. No one opposes it. But we're having a problem getting it moving. So, I don't know, I'm getting a real education through my son. And the struggles that teachers have now, from region to region, within the classroom. And we were rushing to put a test in place that honestly would have compared apples to oranges, because it was New Jersey asking for, right? So you're going to measure one test against another one, and I thought it made sense to just slow it down. There's a commission that we created to study it. And I think that Governor Kane is correct when it shouldn't be the legislature that's developing this, that it should be educators. It should be everyone that's involved in education from all sides to come up with a good product. We actually did that with tender reform, and it worked. So for me, I think we're better off putting it in the hands of experts and then coming back with something that we can that will work.
Let me skip over Mike, because I do want to come back to you, but Amy, speak to this as well. Let me just add, a question came quickly on this, call out the Commissioner a little on this. That task force that was part of the compromise over the summer has yet to be announced. We're looking forward to that. I'm sure it's coming soon. But one question was, why not, Senator Sweeney, why not act on that bill since the compromise hasn't been fully realized as yet? I'll let you come back to that, but we are waiting for that. And then the rest of the compromise, for those who hadn't followed it, was basically reducing to a fairly small level the amount that these test scores will count, these test progress will count towards certain teachers' evaluations to a point where they're, I wouldn't say negligible, but they're a small piece of it. But Amy, speak to NJA is, obviously a big player politically as well as educationally in the state. And they've been some of the more outspoken critics of the use of PART. But they've also, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, I've heard your president speak quite a bit in favor of Common Core. So, clarify all that so folks sort of know where NJA is on this issue.
Sure. New Jersey has... As was stated with the other panel, New Jersey has had standards since the late 90s. And we are not, as an organization, nor myself personally, as a former teacher for 25 years, I am not opposed to standards, and NJEA is not opposed to standards. We want to make sure that the teachers have had the opportunity to dig in, and I think Pat was the one who said that, needed to dig in and pull apart and peel the standards so they understand the language of the standards, they understand what is expected of the children at each grade level. And it has to be remembered that the standards were adopted by the state board, and although the legislation didn't have that part of it and being adopting it, however, there was public comment at every stage of the drafts of the standards, and it took about 2 years to do that. And it's important that teachers have the opportunity to get in there, get the standards, talk to each other, help produce good lessons, have aligned materials. Just because a textbook has a seal on it that says we're aligned to the Common Core, doesn't mean that it was originally blown up and looked at based on the standards. It was taken and new things were added and things were shifted around. It's not the old way of doing things. It is a new way, which means that people need to have the opportunity and the resources and the time, as Pat said, for the teachers to work in collaborative groups. And that's where we're looking at, that it's important that the standards are there. We agree with the standards. Yes, we also feel that some of the standards at the lower grades are a little too aggressive and maybe not age appropriate. But it has to be remembered that what you read as a standard is what has to be accomplished at the end of the school year, so that the 10 anchor standards are completed by the end of 12th grade. And so if you look at the standards in that line, you can see how they can progress and how the teachers can build their lessons towards them. So we just want to make sure that our friends in the legislature can help get teachers the opportunity and the time and the resources and the money and everything that goes with it to actually work with these standards, because they are connected to the park, which we don't agree with standardized tests being used to evaluate students or evaluate staff, because it is a snapshot throughout their educational career. We want to make sure that we have teachers being able to do this, because the language of the standards will be the language of the assessment. So if the students and the teachers all understand the language of the standards, then the assessment will hopefully fall into place.
Hi, I want to follow, give us a little context here. And you can also, I think I know where you stand on this, but tell me, you've heard this conversation, I'm sure you followed New Jersey in the lead up to this event as well. How do we fit into the national picture in terms of other states debating this? There's been some states who pulled out of PARC. I think there's been states that have pulled out of the Common Core. I'm correct on that. You know, are these familiar arguments? Are we, you know, we an outlier on some of them? You know, speak a little bit to the national scene and where New Jersey fits.
No, happy to. So here are the facts on what's happening nationally. First of all, there so far is really only one state, Oklahoma, that pulled out of the Common Core standards themselves and immediately replaced it with something else. They went back to their old standards. And if you go to Oklahoma today, there is a great amount of chaos around what's going to happen next. They don't know what tests they're going to use 4 months from now. There's a lot of infighting happening. And so, you know, on the other side of the decision, like to repeal the Common Core, feels a little scary to me, because you just look there and they don't know how they're going to get to the next point. They have to give some test this spring. They don't know what that test is going to be. Indiana is a case where they pulled out of the Common Core and then had a review commission, came out with new standards that look a lot like the Common Core. And the interesting lesson there was that, you know, for many of the supporters of Governor Pence, Republican, many of his supporters in his base are still angry with him. They demanded that he pull out of the Common Core, which he did, but because the new standards still look like a lot like the Common Core, they're still as angry at him, if not more so than ever. So it's an interesting political lesson, because you don't get out of the politics of this. And the reason they look a lot the same is because in Indiana, like in most places, people buy into the idea that we should set college and career-ready standards. And we start with that assumption that you know, we should set the standard where you need to be successful in college and career. Turns out it's going to be mostly the same as the Common Core. You know, in Oklahoma, the legislature did get involved, right? And they passed a bill saying we're pulling out of the Common Core, and we have the right to approve the next set of standards, or even revise the next set of standards, and they have to make sure they have nothing to do with the Common Core. Which a lot of us scratch our heads and say, well, then what does that mean? Fractions, reading, math? How does that? I mean, those are gonna, right? As you, I think you're gonna be in there. How do you? So, you know, some interesting developments. So in the standards, we're talking basically about just Oklahoma, Indiana, sort of, and then there's 3 other states that right now are looking at revising their standards, and we're not sure if they're going to, in the end, be more like Indiana or Oklahoma. The assessments has been different. We have had several states have decided in the end not to use PARC or Smart and Balanced. Looks like in the spring we're probably going to have about 30 states give one of those assessments, and then so that means probably about 12 to 15 states in the standards but not in the assessments. Let me just say that I am very concerned about those states because I think everybody would agree that if you just have the standards and you don't have assessments that are aligned to those standards, you still have a system that's very disjointed. And what we learned from the last 15 years is that at the end of the day, if teachers and schools are being held accountable for the test, then the test becomes the standard. So it's really important then that you have a good test, a test that is aligned to the standards. I am still hopeful that both PARC and Smarter Balance will be those kinds of tests, and just much better tests. I mean, teachers have rightfully said for years that they didn't like the old multiple choice tests, that they were encouraging very low-level kind of teaching and learning. I think New Jersey had a better test than many states, but still wasn't great. And the hope is with a much better assessment, with more writing, with more challenging questions, more problem-based questions, with the online technology, that all of that is both going to do a better job measuring what students know. It's also going to encourage better teaching and learning in the classroom. So I think the sooner you can get to that and turn the page on the old test, the better. Totally separate questions how those results should count for schools and for teachers. And you know, there I'm sympathetic to the idea that we're asking teachers to do something very new. And there's a transition. Most states have decided that there should be some kind of grace period while we're going through this transition.
Thank you. Speak to, you know, where we're headed. Right away, Senator Sweeney. But you know, are we at a wait and see now that we have a compromise? There are still some bills that are out there. There's still a lot of angst about it. You know, what is the next step in terms of the legislature on where we're headed with this?
I think the compromise was the next step. You know, I honestly do. What we said is, we're not saying what was proposed is wrong. We just want to get it right. And I think everyone up here agrees that if you're going to do something, you want to do it right. As I'm hearing how states are fighting, arguing politically over this, we did something unique. We compromised. You know, so we didn't say this is all wrong, this is all right. We said we want to get it right. And as people are rushing to choose sides, and this is a very charged issue, as you know, we're saying, no, it's not worth throwing it away. And even when I hear from the teachers and the superintendents, you know, they don't want to see it go away. They just want it right. So we get something good. You know, when I listen to what other states are doing, we say, okay, get the legislature back to matter. And let's put all the experts in the room. And then we're going to come out with a product. This wasn't a delay tactic. This was a move between Republicans and Democrats to care enough not to politicize it, to find compromise. And that's what's, you know, it's pretty unique. New Jersey seems like it does it more than a lot of states. But we saw all the sides, and you know, everybody wants to win. How about if we get it right? That's what I'm at.
Speaking, and I will ask you to speak on this, on that compromise was the appointment of a task force to look at effective testing and influence of testing in classrooms. Still not appointed. Can you speak to that, or?
You know,
I know it's not your job, but
it's not our job, but John, we will be pushing to get that task force set up. The sooner we did it, do it, the better for everyone. We had an idea of the makeup of it, and again, we got the commissioner. I'll give give him a lot of credit because this is the guy, he's like Henry Kissinger. You know what I mean? The way he's handling things. But the task force has to get set up now because we came up with a compromise. It can't be just compromise at aid. It has to be a compromise. Let's move forward. And
Do you have any insight on why that is taking as long as it has?
we got a lot of things we got to get completed. We have a whole lot of commissions, a whole lot of boards. We have a lot of things that need to get done, and the sooner this gets done, the better. I know there's been discussions with the front office. John, I wasn't prepared to really answer that one. I mean, to be honest with you.
Glad to help.
You know, I appreciate it. But, you know, Commissioner might know more than I, to be honest with you.
Hey, Senator O'Scanlan, I wanted to bounce one off you. You and I, speaking beforehand, remarked on the interesting politics of this issue, where you have folks coming at you from really across the spectrum in a lot of ways. Speak to that a little bit and what kind of challenges that poses you as a legislator, as well as, I mean, you know the governor pretty well, and I imagine you've spoken with him on some of this. Speak to some of the interesting bedfellows that have emerged out of this.
Sure, John. Real quick, I do have to correct. You said it wasn't what you meant to say, Commissioner, but you like Henry Kissinger, except I'm very much better looking.
Very much for that.
I'm here. I'm classing you later. So, we're going to butter my bread.
You do that when you're in the minority.
There you go. But it really is a fascinating topic from a political perspective. There's no natural constituency for a Common Core or the park test. Look, there's reasons for everybody to oppose it. You have folks on the left, my friends, NJEA, particularly about the park test, and they support Common Core. On the one hand, and they have their own complications internally. And on the right, you have folks who are against government from the top down. On the left, the teachers I hear, we don't want our assessments to be politicized and to have administrators be able to skew our assessments one way or another for political reasons. But on the flip side, they don't want standardized tests either. We can't have it both ways. There's not a third option. A combination of the two, with people paying attention, is the right way to go. On the right, you have folks saying we need to know that our education dollars are being invested where they're doing the most good, where they are helping their children the most, and we need to be able to figure that out. Yet, they are also against tests that are consistent and standards that are consistent at the same time. So it's a really fascinating topic. Strange bedfellows with some of the folks on the hard right and hard left coming together. And again, there's no natural constituency for these standards and these tests. That leaves it up to legislators with some integrity to be able to say to everyone, well, no, sorry, you're wrong in some areas, and to move forward. So I think we have. I think our leadership in the legislature has come through on this, and the executive branch, the governor as well. First, nobody's happy, but I think that we're going to get to a good place with Commissioner Hesby guiding us at the right man at the right time. So I think we're going to get there. Politics is definitely fascinating.
Speaker Prieto, former chair of the Budget Committee, I wanted to ask you some questions about the money on this. The tests themselves will cost, you know, I've seen different figures, maybe the Commissioner can add, but it's $20+ million a year. But there's been a lot of talk about the additional costs in general for the training that's involved, not just the tests, but the Common Core as well, the technology that's involved, and this was a question that came out of from the audience, you know, that we received some money from the federal government on this in terms of the race to the top and the like, but there's been different price tags of up in, you know, in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Are those compelling arguments to you, and does the state have, given it as a state mandate to a degree in this one, does the state have a responsibility to help schools that are already facing some pressure with budget caps and the like to defray some of these costs?
As the former budget chairman, one thing that I did, I think to be very stingy and so we don't spend our dollars. So it's a great question, which which I think is a challenging question. And if you ask administrators here, that's one of the biggest concerns. The price tag that I've actually seen up to $450, which is a big sum. When you look at schools' IT budget, that's something that they may not be prepared to have. So obviously, we always talk state mandate, state pay. How are we going to do that in such a short period of time? I think today, everybody's now ready to implement it. My other concern also on these type of tests just being computer-based, which I get it, it's easier to score these tests a lot quicker than when you did it with a pencil, but there's also to see are these kids ready at these different grade levels to be able to take online testing. Are they prepared through the schools for their IT curriculum to make sure that they are able to navigate well? The short answer for this is right now we've been in economic times, so we're getting money to schools. Many schools are below adequacy, so we have not been funding them properly. So I think that is a major concern that most administrators will tell you, have told me, that that would be one of the challenges of implementing it, is what that cost is and are be able to do it. That's why sometimes implementing it in a small way is probably the best way to make sure we're there and we have the money to be able to fund it.
Hey, Amy, this is a question, and I'm curious, because I've heard different things on this. You talked about the NJA's official position on these issues, and I think those are pretty well known. Individual teachers, this is a question from somebody who said that they have not spoken to one teacher who's in favor of the standards, especially at the elementary school levels, and I certainly have heard some angst among about part. What do teachers think? I mean, I know you represent them and you talk to an awful lot of them through your programs. Where are teachers' heads right now on this issue?
As I said, I work throughout the state and work with helping teachers understand the standards. Now, I haven't had that many have come to me and said that they do not like the standards. When the standards first came out, as it was said before, it was very quiet. And until the assessment was connected with it, then the furor began, because we saw that now we're going to have, we have the standards, and now we're going to have an assessment to measure the standards. Oh no, they're going to be on computer. Oh no, do we have the infrastructure? So I think the teachers right now are in that turmoil of, they know the standards, but they haven't been given the time, I'm going to go back to what I said earlier, to really get into them and to be able to effectively implement them, be it because of lack of funding, lack of materials, but then now we have this test coming, and as you said, it's a lot of money for the districts to have to buy these different tools to use, whether it's going to be laptops, it's going to be tablets, it's going to be desktop computers. And many of the teachers expressed that the standards have built into them how to use technology in your instruction. However, what I'm afraid of is that districts have spent a lot of money on obtaining these pieces of technology, that we want to make sure that they're in the hands of the students and not put in a closet and become very, very expensive test booklets, means of testing, because we're afraid they might break and we would have to replace them. Because if you read the standards say the technology should be infused, and it shouldn't just be, is the child able to type enough so they can get in there and take that test? They should be working on these devices all year long, rather than just for the testing time. And again, I'm hearing a lot of teachers that say they don't have that aspect either. So they don't have the use of the technology all year round. We see that as a detriment.
And do you see it more, I don't know if you can make the distinctions, elementary, high school, or special ed versus limited English teachers? I mean, are there...
There is angst amongst the special education teachers and the ELL, especially when it comes to the PARCC assessment. Park has definitely said they will not put the test in any other language other than English, except for possibly the map, pieces of the map. And I know that's caused a lot of angst in New Jersey because we look at ELL differently than many other states in the nation. Special education, also, we've always said when a child is classified and is in special education, we work to level the playing field for the child. And we say that we're going to get them from where they are and work with them to bring them up to where they need to be. And sometimes it takes a lot longer. However, with the intersection of IDEA and ESEA, the No Child Left Behind, the law says, federal says, that you have to teach students at their chronological grade level. And so unless a child is severely impaired, they will have to take the test at the grade level. Now, there will be things built into Park for accommodations. There is something called the Park Accommodations Manual, and it does address special education, and it does address ELL. And if you just Google Park Accommodations Manual, you can find it. But still, again, we're looking at the ability of the students to use the technology, to be at the level they need to be in the standards, to have to take an assessment at the chronological grade level.
We're going to open up the room to, if there's folks who want to ask some questions. We have a couple here, but I also want to provide a chance, so get your ideas together. Mike, I had a question. Again, I'm asking you to provide some national context, but I'm also curious your reaction to what's happening in New Jersey. I mean, there's, we've had compromises, and we have now at least a year, maybe two, of somewhat of a grace period. I've heard, as this debate was raging, some others who are saying, we keep doing this and we keep putting it off, and we'll always find a reason to put it off. And we need to do it. And you only force real change by forcing real change. Speak to, are there some states who've done this, in your view, right, and how is New Jersey doing?
Well, I think we have to be careful to define what is the it that we're talking about. So my understanding, some of this is wrong, is that you are planning to give the Park assessment this spring. That's hugely important. I mean, I think that we have been in this awkward phase since 2010 where we had the standards and we've been waiting for the assessments to get built, and now we're finally giving them. And I think that is going to be a huge milestone in the way to implementation. There'll be much more clarity for educators about what's expected, because we'll be able to look at that test, see what's on it. We'll have this moment where we will see the scores likely drop, and we'll get through that. And then we can continue on implementation. I think the big, my understanding of the commission, it sounds like the big question is, what do you do with the results? And what are the consequences for schools and for educators around those results? And I think this is the time and this is the right time to have a grace period on those questions, and then get back to some, those accountability measures once we start to have some trend lines, once we start to see how it's going. So I think New Jersey's doing it right. I worry about there's been a handful of states, including our neighbor to the north, New York, that have rushed the implementation. New York came up with its own Common Core assessment, gave it 2 years earlier than everybody else. They were sticking to their guns on the teacher evaluation, and they've got a huge mess on their hands now, in my view, because that has led to a lot of problems. So I think that, on the other hand, I worry about states that have decided not to use the assessments or delayed the assessments themselves. So I don't know. I think and I'm not just saying this because I'm here in New Jersey, but we're sitting next to the state senator who's also much bigger than I am. But I think you're doing it right.
Any questions from?
Yes. Hi, my name is Dan Henry, and I've been a member of New Jersey's School Choice Education Reform Alliance for a few years. When I moved here from California, it was the first group I wanted to join, because in California I worked on school vouchers, Proposition 174. It's a very big thing with me. When I got the invitation to this event, it said it was a conference, and I figured a conference would mean we'd all get to speak and talk about our different viewpoints about Common Core. But apparently that's not the case. This is more of a Delphi event. If people want to look up Delphi technique, that's what this is. The outcome apparently has been decided beforehand. I looked at the viewpoints of the speakers, and it's 8-1 in favor of, let's implement Common Core right now. It's become a fait accompli. The only person who spoke against it was Bob Bowden. And, you know, my question for the school choice group that I belong to is, when did we decide that school choice is not a good idea? Because this is a choice. This is a top-down decision that's being imposed on parents by the government. And I have to agree with one of the panel members earlier who said there's a lot of misinformation being spread about Common Core. It's true, but most of it's coming from the board, apparently. One speaker said this has widespread support. Well, that's just not true. If you go to the U.S. News and World Report issue of August 20th, 2014, that's a couple of weeks ago, the headline is, Common Core supports waning most now opposed standards. So I don't know where the reality is, but this is a world media publication that says something completely different. So my question to the NJSCERA is, when did you decide that choice was a bad idea?
But I don't think any of them are up here.
Well, that's telling right there.
It's about, let me ask a different version of that, which was a question from the audience, was about choice, school choice, and he, the questioner raised this prospect. Is, I wish he could, Senator Sweeney had to leave. He had another engagement that he was pressed to get to, so he apologizes. But I guess I'll ask both of Senator Scanlon as well as Speaker Prieto. The Opportunity Scholarship Act was a bill that been floating around for as long as I remember in one form or another, and one that I know some folks in this room have supported strongly. You know, it uses tax credits. Others have called it a form of school vouchers. Is that dead? Are we going to see that again? The governor pitched it for a little while, but we haven't heard back from him. This is off the topic of Common Core, I get it, but trying to address at least one issue raised by the questioner.
Well, first, let me get to your question. I don't see support of standards and support of choice as mutually exclusive. I'm a big supporter of choice. But we need to have some standards so we can assess the job that public schools are doing, choice schools within the public system, choice schools out of the public system. And I think that choice schools will distinguish themselves. So I don't think that's something that pro-school choice folks ought to resist.
Well, actually, Assembly, and that wasn't my question about the standards versus Common Core. My question was about choice in terms of parents who are the stakeholders having choice in the education system. It's great to have a conference, but there's never been a series of conferences that allow common citizens, we taxpayers, and parents to come in and ask fundamental questions like, where in the Constitution does it say we have to send our children to government schools? That's a fundamental question. Things like that need to be asked, but we're not given the opportunity. And someone up there before said that if you go to your school board, you'll be able to speak. My former co-host on the radio show I had moved to New Hampshire because he thought it was going to be a free state. He spoke up at a school board meeting about a pornography book that his daughter was assigned. He was arrested for violating the 2-minute rule. I mean, we don't get to speak and we don't have a choice.
I think we can have.
Yeah, I want to rescue for the 2-minute rule, but let's get this answered. Go ahead, respond to us.
Well, look, and I'm happy to talk about those issues. This may not be the forum for the folks that put this forum together are not necessarily obligated to go there, but I think maybe they would. So I'm happy to participate if you want to have some of those discussions. Absolutely. And I'm sorry, back to our...
Yeah, I mean, I know you're about the point.
About school choice, the Opportunity Scholarship Act. I've been a consistent supporter of the Opportunity Scholarship Act and the concept of choice in general. I think that if we do it right, competition is a good thing. I have had fierce debates on that topic with my good friends, some of them on the other side of the aisle. Not the President of the Company, they haven't really got into that issue, but certainly NJA and my friends there. But I would hope it's not dead. I would hope for the taxpayers in the suburbs who don't like dumping their money into schools that are spending $30,000 a year on students taking a lousy education, and also for kids themselves who are getting that lousy education and the parents of those kids
we should be able to bring those folks together, figure out how to challenge the system. We are right now probably wasting $700 million, and if you had the guts, closer to the schools, redistribute that money, serve those kids better, save tax dollars, elevate education across the board, you expose kids to more cross-cultural experience as well. I think if we had the guts, we could do that. I think we're going to have to do that because we've got a budget issue, a budget hole that's more than $5 billion before you get to doing a lot of the other things we're talking about. So I think you've got to explore some of these things. It's not. So I hope it's not dead. And I don't think we have a choice but for it not to be dead. We talked about standards, we talked about math. Thank God we didn't have standards when I was in school because I would have passed. But I wouldn't need it to pass because if you do it in the New Jersey state budget, the laws of mathematics are thrown out right away. It does not adhere to the laws of mathematics. So, but seriously, I think challenging our system is something we should do. It's something we're going to have to do.
You can answer this quick and then we'll have another question.
Yeah, and I'll try to be as quickly as possible on this. And I would respectfully disagree with, one comment that a lot of kids are getting a lousy education. And I know you didn't mean it in that way because
I did. Kids in Asbury Park, kids in Newark, graduating these kids.
But and I understand that, but that doesn't mean that the curriculum is not being taught at those schools because some of the kids are flourishing there. There's a lot of other challenges that are there. I am a former product of an Abbott district, and as I told somebody earlier here today, what you're hearing from me is my second language. Not until I was 11 years old, I started learning this language. So those are barriers that are different. So one size doesn't fit all. And you taking out, depending on the support group that you have at home, that's a key component also. And I've gotten to on that aspect, talked about it a lot. And we can, take a whole day on this topic about whether school choice should be or should not be. I'm still not 100% on board of being able to cherry pick and take out. So that's my belief, and I use it from personal experiences, and I will definitely have that dialogue. But I'm always willing to compromise and look at it, and I'm not saying that we don't have to do certain things. And we talk about charter schools or something like that.
Yeah, I don't want to get
into that aspect. So I just wanted to explain because you asked about the vouchers and all that. So I do have the concern because it is very big state, but one size doesn't fit all. And we do have a lot of great public education out there. So, and it all depends where the student in that support group, where they take it to the next level.
Question, Carly. Keith, we are running a little short on time, so keep the question short. Yeah, well.
Question concerns refusing the test, and I will lead into that by stating that there is a statewide need for public hearings. Parents that I speak to day in and day out on Facebook, on the phone, takes up my day, 24 hours a day sometimes. Statewide public hearings would express to you and allow parents to speak out and tell you why they want to refuse the test. Within a matter of hours, 1,500 signed on to a Facebook page about opting out of standardized tests in New Jersey. I believe in accountability, I believe in standards. And I don't like children to be used as, to be civilly disobedient in the classroom. And yet we don't address those very common concerns of parents. When I read in the Wall Street Journal, Lou Gerstner's subtitle to an article that Lou Gerstner is the co-founder of Achieve and former CEO of IBM saying, let's abolish all local school districts. There's a sense that local control of parental rights are being ignored. Statewide public hearings may tell you in person, not indirectly from me, what parents are trying to tell you. Ridgewood had a wonderful, wonderful event about October 2nd, where we had a turn at the door. The question is, what will you do to hear from more parents directly about their concerns about refusing the test, and will you create a law or work with the Department of Education to set parameters for that so that children are not being put in that awkward position to do it on their own?
I guess I'll try and answer that. We actually had talked about slowing down the implementation of this. I guess the task force was supposed to be put together and was supposed to get, the first report back by the end of the year. And President Sweeney's not here, and he had talked about that compromise of trying to accomplish that. I would definitely circle back with you and with Commissioner around how we can get as much input as we can from all stakeholders.
I have spent a lot of time talking to probably dozens of parents in my district, outside my district. A very good friend of mine, very close to, recently had his daughter sit out standardized testing. He was planning to have her sit out standardized testing in the spring. We spoke at length about that, and I've spoken to probably a dozen parents specifically about an opt-out. On the one hand, I do believe there should be another scholastic activity and children who are going to opt out should be given. But I do understand the incentive of the desire on the part of the administration, both at the state level and the school level, to incentivize children to take the test. If there was a standard, 95% of kids have to take it. So I understand that as well. Ultimately, my discussion with my friend about his daughter was, he didn't convince me that it was going to hurt his daughter to take the test. I know there's some disagreement there, but he could not verbalize to me how it was going to hurt her to take the test. She did take the AST test in the past, particularly the part test. Other parents have had their kids opt out of any standardized test. But I've already expressed my belief that ultimately we do need to have some assessments. And if we're not going to have standardized tests, what's the alternative? We heard earlier that I think it was chaos in Oklahoma. I used the word anarchy. I could look at Oklahoma too. I thought, okay, well, what are the other alternatives? If you're either going to have standards or you're not. That's what it comes down to. If you're going to have standards, you have to have some sort of standardized test. If you want to argue, just throw standards out altogether, I guess one could try to make that argument. One has been able to substantiate and bring it around to that line of thinking. Well, I'm perfectly open to continuing to do it, continuing to have that dialogue.
Mike, there's a question here regarding high school graduations and Park. Park, for the moment, is going to be one gateway for high school graduation, and there's some alternative paths as well. But ultimately, I guess the assumption is that it will be a high school graduation test. But others asked about whether scores are used or not for placements and promotion and the like. Your broader picture, and most of the questions were critical of that notion. But your broader picture on this, should these be cutoff points for kids to graduate, to move on to grade, move up a grade or not? Ultimately, maybe not in the beginning, because obviously there's going to be some adjustment. But where are you thinking on that?
These are good questions. Each state gets to decide this on its own. To my knowledge, there's just been a handful of states that have made it clear how they're going to handle this. States that have had high school graduation exams. Maryland, for example, where I live. And generally, the idea is that there's going to be one level that's going to indicate college and career readiness, right? And that's going to be a very high level. You probably, first time out in New Jersey, you might only be getting 40% of the kids to that level. And that might be used for placement decisions. So, some state university systems have said, we will use that for placement about whether you take remedial education or not, instead of AccuPlace or something else. But those states are all going to set a lower level for high school graduation, right? Because they acknowledge that, first of all, it would be politically suicidal to say that we're going to flunk 60 or 70% of the kids and not allow them to get a high school diploma. But second of all, that college and career ready is a very high standard, and we can't expect 100% of kids to get there, at least anytime soon. We don't want to make the same no child left behind mistake again when we talk about universal achievement of those standards. So what you're going to see in many states is, this higher bar that may be used for college placement, a somewhat lower bar that indicates sort of basic literacy and numeracy to be used as the high school graduation exam. I think that makes a lot of sense. Again, it needs to be phased in, make sure kids have time to reach those standards. But you look at a state like Massachusetts, that kind of graduation exam seems to have done a whole lot of good in raising achievement and getting more kids to step up.
Do you have thoughts on this, Amy, in terms of, there's obviously a carrot and stick element to it to a degree. Is that something that the NJEA
Yes.
wants to
I
weigh in on?
remember back when the HESPA first went from the HSPT to the HESPA, and then there was the talk of the students, and then the Algebra 1 exam came in, and then I served on a committee with the department, and it was, what are you going to do if the child passes the class and fails the test, passes pass, fails, all the different combinations, and we never could come to any sort of conclusion with it, and it wasn't used as a definite put for graduation. And it is difficult to say, and my concern, not only just as NJBA, but as an educator, is we have the different options. If you pass the part, you'll be considered, okay. Or you could use the 400 on the SAT, whatever the number is for the ACT, the military test, the AccuPlacer. However, I just want to make sure that that doesn't put a burden on families and students to have to now try to run out and take these tests and say, okay, now I have to pay for an SAT, or I have to pay for an ACT, or I have to find out when the AccuPlacer is being given, or find out when the military test is given. So there is a lot of controversy around the idea of using any sort of assessment for college graduation. And we've always been against that type of thing.
One of the things we haven't touched on in this last question having to do with time spent on testing. And this is something for that commission to speak to. But, representing teachers, but also representing families, and then you're having a sense of this. Is this a worry of yours? Are we, sort of missing the balance, or good assessment does take some time? And I think that would be the argument of the department, that to get good, useful results, it does take a little more time than what we're doing now. Who wants to address that sentiment?
From my discussions with the very parents I was referring to before, and colleagues in the legislature, concern about how much that perception is overwhelming amount of time we spend on standardized testing. It's my understanding that ASK was around 6.5 hours per year, I think, and PARC was around 9.5 hours. So, okay, we're increased by 50%. Is that overwhelming? Not my gut, but I delved into it further, and the benefits of PARC are that we are getting test results in every category every year, and results that can be compared from district to district and state to state. Should that take a little bit more time? Probably. Is 3 hours more too much? I can talk about that, but it doesn't seem overwhelming to me. I went back to those very parents and looked at those numbers, and I'm waiting for them to get back to me to justify their continued contention that we're doing an overwhelming amount of standardized testing. I think right now, we did both tests this year, so I think it meant I don't know about all. So maybe it does feel an enormous issue, but I'm not sure that it's a long-term issue. I'm still involved in that dialogue and open to it. Knowing those factors, I'm not convinced it's a problem.
Speaker Prieto, you want to say some final words?
On the testing itself, those are some of the concerns that I have. Is if you actually take that you are now having these tests for such a long period of time, and they're only for English and math is the two subjects that are there. Are these teachers now, is that test becoming the curriculum? Are you teaching only to that test? And what that test, the outcome, is it what the kids get on that test? Are you being evaluated on it? So there's still a lot of questions that I have. Not at home any longer as a liberal, but I have an educator that I hear it from her firsthand of some of the challenges that there's certain things that, like I said, a lot of things on paper look really good, but sometimes when you put it into practical reality, it doesn't really work. So we need to be just mindful of it and move forward on this. And like I said, I always take the input from all the key stakeholders and the professionals that are the ones that help us and guide us to be able to, make the right decisions at the state level. So I think this is a work in progress, and I think, when you look at the Common Core standards as a whole, I think it's a good thing for everybody to be on the same page. We just need to figure out how we achieve that and make sure it works for everybody.
All right. Give a hand to our panel. Do you want to say some final words, Mark?
both panels and the moderators. I think they were very candid, very well informed. The final speaker today is going to be the Commissioner of Education of the state of New Jersey, who has listened carefully to all the panelists as well as the questions from the floor. And he will give his thoughts before we adjourn. Commissioner Hasbro.
Sure, everyone is chock full of ideas and information, so let me thank the School Choice Education Reform Alliance for bringing us all together this morning. It's important to have these conversations, and I just want to personally thank the Alliance for doing this. And as you can see in your booklet, I think the Alliance is going to have a conversation on a number of different topics throughout the state. And it's good. It's good to have this good outpouring of ideas and have this conversation. And I'm just glad that I was a part of it. I'm glad that you were able to make it here as well and hear all these voices. A couple of points just that I got from all of our voices this morning, and that is I think we all agree that our greatest challenge and our greatest responsibility and duty is preparing our children to go on to college and career when they graduate. And the college and career opportunities that will be out there in the future are not going to be achievable by our students if we use the curriculum of yesterday. It just will not happen. Matter of fact, the curriculum we're implementing today, we know, is not producing the results our children need. I was a community college president, I get it. 2/3 of my students couldn't arrive on my campus ready to do college level work. We're failing our students, we know we are. What do we do about it? And I think that's issue number 2. And another area of agreement, by the way, New Jersey, and I think a lot of our conversation has to focus on New Jersey because we're different than so many other states, has been doing standards-based reform, improving our schools through standards since the 80s. We have 25 years of experience in doing this. We always strive for the best standards, the most rigorous standards that are comparable. So we have an idea. If I'm a parent, I want to have an idea of how my child's doing, not only progressing towards college and career readiness, but how they're doing against other students in other districts in the state, in other states and other countries, because they do what they would be expected to thrive in a global economy. And so we have to be mindful of that as well. So what the State Board of Education has done is to continue that tradition of finding the best and highest quality standards. And in 2010, they arrived at the conclusion that the Common Core was the answer. And by the way, the State Board readopted the Common Core a few months back. They held public hearings throughout the state of New Jersey a few months back and invited everyone to come and give them their views after 4 years of implementation about the Common Core. And based upon all of that testimony, they decided again, the Common Core was the goals that New Jersey should set for our children, so that in the coming years, every single one of those children can graduate ready to go on to college and career. So I'm very comfortable that we have the right standards. And then, of course, standards are meaningless if you don't measure progress. When I was commissioner back in 1999, the two most poignant points that were made to me as we were adopting our core curriculum back in the late 90s, and then testing, and we wanted to start testing elementary school kids. And the two most important points made to me is the data we were getting from those assessments weren't actionable to improve individual students' instruction. And the data was coming back too late in order to be meaningful. These PARCC assessments answer both of those questions, that we need standards that can test the breadth and depth of our standards, and we need to have them offered in a way that we can get the data back quickly to be used by schools. And so these PARCC assessments answer those two challenges directly. And I'm very comfortable that we're moving into the first assessments ready to go, but you have a commitment from me, and you should have understand this commitment, that we will let the data drive our decisions. We had a great opportunity last spring to demonstrate that when information is brought to our attention, and a big R, by the way, just not the department. This is a across the state with many different partners participating. Legislature led a lot of these conversations. I give them a lot of credit for being here today. And we said, all right, we need to change the way we're implementing this new change process. And we'll continue to do that. We will continue to be flexible. We will continue to be driven by data and information. It's a very dynamic process, but it's one that's going to lead to children's lives being made better and the economy of the state being made better. And I'm very comfortable saying that to all of you based upon not only my own information base after 25 years in and out of education, but also all the conversations we've had today. So I look forward to continuing these conversations as we move into the first assessments. We'll learn a lot, by the way. As we administer these tests, we'll learn a lot about our standards, we'll learn a lot about the assessments, and we'll learn a lot about what we should and should not be using data from these assessments in educational improvement. So again, thank you everyone for being here. Any questions you have, we're very open to any type of conversation you want to have, and thanks again to the School Choice Alliance. And I'll turn it over to you, Pete.
Yeah, you could.
I'm not sure if all of you realize just how dedicated this man has been to education in New Jersey. Started out, I think, his career years ago working in the department. But he's been a commissioner of education twice. He was, I think, deputy superintendent and then acting superintendent in Willingboro Schools. Was head of Burlington County College. Now he's back in the DOE. And interesting enough, as he said to me, he says, we must be doing something right because now everybody's mad at us. It's not the people just to the left and the right, but it seems like everybody is. And that's okay, because sometimes we need controversy in life. So one just administrative thing before we close. In your booklets is this blue sheet of paper. And we need you all to focus on that blue sheet of paper. On the first page, we're talking about a couple of conferences that have now been scheduled. There'll be one in Camden on January 16th about what's going on in the Camden Public Schools. And perhaps most people in this room realize, but an awful lot of people in the state don't realize, that we're actually on a track to shut down the traditional Camden public school system. And in 5 to 7 years, it literally may not exist anymore. And that has huge policy implications for all kinds of things, like English as a second language students, special ed students, kids moving into the district, comparisons between what goes on in Camden and the surrounding districts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we're doing a research study on Camden as we speak, which will be released before that conference, so people can get some ideas about really what's going on there. The second one is on virtual schools. I think we all realize that pretty much in America today, K-12 education really hasn't changed in over 150 years. We've got a teacher in front of a classroom. We've got a whiteboard instead of a blackboard. Technology really hasn't impacted things to any significant degree. Are we on the cusp of that changing with virtual schools and blended learning and online curriculum, et cetera, et cetera? I certainly don't know the answer to that question, but we're going to try to focus on that in February. And then, if you look at the back, we talk about other future topics that we intend to have conferences on, not scheduled yet, but there's an awful lot of very controversial and impactful things that go on in running the public education system that probably cost the state $25 to $30 billion, and it's over 40% of all the state spending in the state, county, local, and state level. And Governor King made a very interesting comment. He said the legislature doesn't pay enough attention to these issues. And I was very happy with the legislators that came today and spoke frankly to us. And I think with a lot of help from everybody in this room and others, we can get more legislators to participate in these conferences so we can get them to focus on these issues and listen to the controversy and hopefully make knowledgeable decisions. So anyway, thank you all for being here. Particularly thank you to the partnership with the Department of Education, Commissioner Espy, and we'll see you all at a conference in January in Camden. And there isn't
School Choice and Education Reform Alliance organizational meeting December 11th, which we expect to have, December 11th in Brunswick, Days Inn, and we do expect to have some legislators there also. Thanks very much.